morning, Ms. Tabashe. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Yes. I heard that counsel for Ms. Brown wished to see me, but we were running late. So if it's something that we can deal with in the open hearing, we may do so, but failing which we could deal with it in chambers during the tea break.
Chairman, he's electing to address you now on the matter.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
There's some prevailing uneasiness regarding our two statements we undertook to provide to the August Commission.
Yes.
As you'd remember, Chair, we approached you in chamber with the evidence leaders, and we mentioned that we've prepared two statements under...
1 second. You mustn't walk here once the hearing has started. Once the hearing has started, nobody must be walking up and down here in the front. Okay, all right.
May I start? Why refresh you, Chair?
Yes,
when we approached
please.
you?
Yeah, we were disturbed.
chambers?
Yeah.
Yes. We mentioned that the two responses we prepared are being delayed in Cape Town because our client is in Cape Town. They have to be relayed to Johannesburg. But primarily, they were based on what we have received on the short summaries. Our colleagues were generous to give us the summaries.
I'm sorry, I'm going to disturb you again. Zonaka. I'm sorry, Mr. Lebala. I just needed to make sure that steps are taken to make sure this thing that doesn't happen again.
Yes, may I recapitulate and start where
Please, yes.
I was referring to the generosity of the evidence leaders. They provided us with the summaries to assist us to understand what allegations were being proffered against Ms. Brown. So we responded in her response to Mr. Saluji's statement and Ms. Van Rensbeck's statement. And the response dealt only with those pages. As you can imagine, Chair, we had the testimony of Ms. Van Rensbeck. Now, it's more inclusive. Now, it raises certain issues that we feel that we have not positively dealt with in the summaries that we've prepared, that were reliant on the few pages that were provided to us. What does that mean? We have to relook and have a fresh approach. That includes us, even including having to bring an application to cross-examine Ms. Janse van Rensbeck. We thought that would never do it. We thought that this little statement, the summaries that we prepared, would be adequate. Now, we just want to advise you and put ourselves on record that we did advise you earlier with our colleagues when he came to approach you in chambers that we'll provide those statements on or before today.
Yes.
We are not going to do that as we want to look at the transcript. And we also would like to enjoy the leverage of hearing the full testimony of Mr. Saluji.
Yeah, okay. No, that's fine. But some deadlines have to be met. I do recall yesterday that I think I said to the extent that your client may be out of time already or will be out of time in due course, you would be required and she would be required to just act diligently and file or deliver her statements without delay and put in whatever condonation, and I would consider the condonation and take it from there.
Well, Chair, that
Yes.
undertaking still stands.
Yes,
But
yes,
as you can imagine,
yes,
our approach to a statement is going also to be influenced by what we hear.
Yeah.
She may not have to include everything.
yes, yes.
You
No,
know,
I understand. Yeah.
So
yeah,
the
yeah.
more we listen, and
Yeah.
please be advised that we follow the commission. My junior
Yes.
colleague is here every
Yeah,
day in the
yes,
interest of
yes.
trying to assist the
Yes,
commission
yes.
in line with the undertaking she gave.
Yes, yes. No, no, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chairman, Mr. Azar Bam, Senior Counsel, represents Mr. Saluji, the witness. May he place himself on record?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Bam.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Justice. I
you.
appear, my name is Azar Bam
Yes.
from the Johannesburg Bar. I appear for the next witness, Mr. Riaz Saluji.
Yes.
I'm instructed by Kamogelo Katle, who's on my left,
Yes.
from the law firm Makabela Huntley Attorneys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes,
Thank you, Chairman.
you may proceed.
Chairman, today the Commission will be taking the testimony of Mr. Saluji. His first name is Riaz. His evidence will principally span the period 2014 to 2015. He'll give the Commission a perspective of what he and other members of the executive team that he led experienced in this period. In particular, he will be speaking also for the CFO, Mr. Figile Mtlonto, and the company secretary, Ms. Elizabeth Africa. As the chairman may be aware, just from the documentation that's been presented, the three of them were suspended in September of 2015 by the board that was inaugurated or in
Yes.
2015. Mr. Saluji will be recounting events that deal not only with governance, but also with the relationship with the department and with the minister. He has therefore divided his bundle of evidence into two, Chairman. There's a part one and a part two, and we've tried to flag them, identify them as such. That's his identification of the issues. So part one, Chairman, really deals with all the issues that related to his tenure as CEO, operational matters, but matters that he gave leadership on. Part two deals with the employment issues that they were faced with once the Mancha board took office. Chairman, the part one and part two should not be confused with the exhibits. I will get to describing what the exhibit numbers are and which particular files Mr. Saluji's evidence is in. This really is just preliminary, Chairman, to say inside the files, the way he's going to deal with his evidence is he'll first deal with the broad issues around Danielle VR labor to the extent that he's able to, and then he'll move on to the employment issues. Chairman, as you're aware, we indicated on Monday that this stream of work falls within terms of reference 1.1, 1.3, and 1.5. And really the investigation that we've undertaken is to see if there's a pattern that can be established or if there's a facilitation of untoward conduct in terms, as foreshadowed by those terms of reference, that this particular commission might have an interest in and may want to look at and draw conclusions from. It's important, Chairman, to point out that the Denel work stream actually has two phases. So please don't be surprised if this is our last witness for what we have called phase one. We are working on a phase two, which really deals with matters that transpired after Mr. Saluji and the then EXCO had left office.
Okay.
Those are matters that he really does not have
Yes.
personal knowledge of, so those will be
Yes.
brought to your attention in due course.
Okay. Okay.
Chairman, might I ask that Mr. Saluji be sworn in?
Before that is done,
Yes, my apologies,
Let's have
yes.
clarity on the two files. You talked about part 1 and part 2.
Chairman,
they
that's-
are both marked Exhibit W4,
Yes?
and then one is marked File 1 of 2, and the other is marked File 2 of 2. I also assume that the one you referred to as part 1 is the one that's marked File 1.
No, Chairman. If you would, Chairman, because your files were brought quite early, we started changing the markings on the spine.
Yes.
So file 1 of 1, you should really mark A next to W4, mark
Well,
it A,
I've got
capital
File
A.
1 of 2.
Yes,
not
file 1
1.
of, I beg your pardon, file 1 of 2,
Yeah.
Chairman, should
Yeah.
be marked A next to W4.
Okay.
You've been marking A next to that for
Yes.
the others, and so we'll,
Okay.
we'll
Yeah,
be
that-
consistent in that.
Yes.
So that's one set of papers.
Yes.
Then the second file is going to be marked W4B.
Okay.
Then, Chairman, if you open,
So the one file will be Exhibit W4A, and the other will be Exhibit W4B.
indeed so.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. Then if you open W4A, Chairman,
Yes.
it's just for a orderly presentation of the evidence that you will then see two flags. The first is marked Part 1,
Yes.
and the second is marked Part 2.
Yes.
And that was just really a structured way of separating the evidence.
Is part 2 the second statement that he made? He
Indeed so.
prepared? Yeah, okay. No,
And
that's-
it deals exclusively with the employment issues
Yes, yeah.
that
yeah.
they had to deal with.
Yes, yes, no, that's fine. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Registrar, please administer the oath or the affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Riaz Saluji.
Do you have any objections to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If
Yes.
so, please raise your right hand and say so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Saluji, please switch your mic on, and you can leave it on for the duration of the hearing. There are 4 files that are at the witness table. The first 2 are W4A and W4B. W4A is the one we'll be using principally because it has the 2 statements that you will be confirming in a few minutes. W4B really has annexures to those statements. Then W5A and W5B are reference files. For today's hearing, I think we'll focus more on W5A because it has the governance documents of Denel in them. So by way of example, it has the MOI, the shareholder compact, strategic intent statements, and so forth that we may refer you to. Then the other part of that bundle has got some transcripts, one from Mr. Pravin Gordhan's testimony and an affidavit that was filed by the then DG of Treasury, National Treasury, dealing with the Section 54(2) application. I do not believe that you will be dealing very much with file W5B because the material there really is, gives rise to matters that occurred after you left Denel. You're comfortable with that?
Yes.
If I can then take you to file W4A, and if you could go to page 1 thereof. Our page 1 we've numbered 001. And if you keep your finger on page 1, have a quick look at page 1, and then go to the back of that first document, if you go to page 28, can you please identify this document for the chairman? So page 1 and page 28 are the pages I'm interested in.
Yeah, I'm there.
And then if you could speak up or bring the mic a little closer. Thank you very much. Yes. Can you identify this document?
Yes, it is the statement that I've prepared, the part 1 statement before the commission.
Thank you. And the signature on page 28 is,
Yeah,
whose
that
is
is
that?
my signature
And when did you sign this document?
on the 19th of February.
You're familiar with the contents of the statement?
Yes.
Thank you. Can you then go to the label part 2, which, and I'm referring you now to page 29 of the paginated papers. If you then go to the back to page 51,
Yes.
again, do you know what this document is?
Yes.
the
It's the second part of my statement.
Thank you. The signature on page 51,
That's mine.
and when was it signed?
19th of February.
Thank you. Then all the other documents that are annexed here to are annexures that you have furnished to the commission with the
Yes.
statements.
That's correct.
Thank you. Are there any corrections that you wish to make to the statement before we start traversing its contents? We'll start with statement 1, and then we'll go to statement part 2.
The correction I was referring to, it seems to have been resolved, so I think it's fine.
Are you happy?
I'm happy
now?
with that, yes.
Okay. If at any time there is anything that does arise, you'll bring it to the chairman's attention.
Yes.
Have you made any similar statements to any court, any tribunal or forum of that nature where there's a record of that statement that has been kept?
No, I've not.
Thank you. Can I then ask you, Mr. Saluji, to take the chairman through what you have called a brief history, which is really a background synopsis of who you are and, in essence, how you came to qualify yourself to occupy a position such as GCEO at Denel. I'll lead you as you go, but please, if you could start off, probably from about paragraph 5.
Thank you, Advocate Kabash. Chairperson, good morning. In terms of my history and how I came to become the GCEO of Denel, it's a long road, so I hope you will indulge me.
Yes,
But,
no, that's fine. Yeah.
Well, just for the record, I was the previous Group CEO of Denel from 2012 January till November 2016. I was suspended between September 2015 and November 2016. So that was the background to this.
Yes, yes.
I come historically from a political family. I was a student activist in 1980. I attended school at an institution called St. Barnabas. I was a member of the SRC then, and I was very involved in the protests against the apartheid government at that point. Obviously, some of the activities that I was engaged in got to the scrutiny of the apartheid authorities. I then left to go into exile in the latter part of 1980. I then proceeded to go to Canada, where I had to finish my studies, my A-levels. I finished those. And then in 1981, I had already by then had decided that I'm going to join Umkhonto we Sizwe, the military wing of the ANC. I left Canada and I proceeded to Angola. In 1981, I arrived in Angola at the age of 18 and I started my military training in Angola. I was in Angola for approximately a year and a half, 81, 82, 83. I was deployed to what we now call the frontline states, primarily in Botswana, in Zimbabwe, and Zambia, and for a short period, for about 9 months, on a special project in the United Kingdom. I have been involved in many different aspects of the armed struggle and political struggle, but predominantly within the armed struggle. Eventually, by 1992, I also was in the raid that took place in Botswana in 1985 by the former South African Defence Force. By 1992, after having various positions in MK and responsible also for the underground structure of what we call ordnance, and that was the movement of weapons and ammunition into the country for MK operations, I was then, in 1992, the regional head of ordnance in Zimbabwe. After the unbannings of the ANC in 1992, I returned back home from exile, and I was based at Shell House, the ANC and headquarters, where the MK headquarters was as well. During that period, I was also appointed to be an advisor to the Sub-Council on Defense during the Transitional Executive Council period. I was also part of the negotiating team that was responsible for the integration of all the various armed forces, both statutory and non-statutory, into the new South African National Defence Force.
Mr. Saluji, if I might interrupt, just to give you a break, give you time to drink a bit of water as well. So essentially you're saying you're a military man by training, and you took part in the discussions that led to the 1994 change in government. When you look at that background you have just sketched to the chairman, what are the salient parts of that you think were a strength when you took on leadership roles in various parts of either the corporate world or Denel in this instance? I just want to break it up so that you don't have to give a large piece of information at the end. But just from this first set of facts, how did that strengthen your hand when you assumed leadership roles?
Thank you, Advocate Kabash. Chairperson, I think given the fact that I joined the military when I was 18, the experience that I've gained with regard to organizational structure, how do you manage large organizations? How do you establish networks of organizations? And if I go through from the beginning of my military training right up to the point at which I was also appointed as an advisor to the Sub-Council on Defense, I have operated at what I call a strategic level. I've operated at what I call an operational level, where the actual operations and decision-making and the establishment of different organizational units are created. And I've operated at the tactical level, right on the ground with the actual physical movement of material, defense material. So in that process, I have grounded myself over that period in a very real way within the military, and that is in my blood. But remember, because MK was also responsible to the ANC, there was a significant level of political oversight and an understanding of how that armed struggle fitted in to the overall struggle against apartheid. And that then was a logical step into moving into the new environment, into the new democratic era, with trying to understand very clearly, at both again strategic operational level, what is the mandate and role of a new National Defence Force and how should it be established?
In fact, part of that training would also have given you exposure to various countries, to leadership in government, in different military formations, and that too was part of that history that you brought when you started off in the SANDF.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the experience that I gained for many years span across not just in an individual country, but across different countries in the continent, particularly how other governments operated, how other governments established their own national defense forces. And I think what is critical also is that because I was involved in the ordnance environment, ordnance, as I've indicated earlier, referring to the weapons and the ammunition, is that I had a very good technical understanding of the equipment and the technology that you use in warfare.
We'll get back to that when we talk about a globalizing Denel. But
before you proceed, Ms. Kabashe, I may have misunderstood you, but when you were summing up what Mr. Saluji said about his military background. I understood you to say he said he was involved in the negotiations that resulted in the change of government in '94. My understanding of his evidence was that he was involved in negotiations for the integration of the military forces, statutory and non-statutory, but I may have misunderstood. Maybe you could just clarify that. with me.
I'll
With
throw
you.
that back at you, Mr. Saluji, because my understanding was that that was a component of the change from an undemocratic state to a democratic state. But I think the evidence is better coming from you.
Okay, Chairperson, I was a member of the team, the MK team, the collective that was responsible for negotiating the establishment of the new National Defence Force. And that entailed the integration into the new National Defence Force at the point of the elections for the new government in 1994, the establishment of the new South African National Defence Force.
Yes.
So I was part of the team that negotiated the integration.
Yes.
I don't know
No,
if that...
that accords with my understanding. Maybe because Ms. Kabash and I might not understand each other where the difference between us is in terms of understanding. I just wanted to make sure that if he did not intend to say he was part of the negotiations at national level, CODESA and so on, if he didn't intend to say he was part of that, the impression shouldn't be created that he was part of it. My understanding from what he is saying is he was involved in regard to the integration of the various military formations and statutory and non-statutory. Obviously, that was part of the overall change that was to happen, but for me, there is a difference between the two. But he may well have been also involved in CODESA and so on, but that's what he may clarify. Mr. Saluji, you look
Chairperson,
like you are keen to clarify.
Yes, I think maybe there was a misunderstanding. I was part of both.
You were part of both.
So I was part of the
Yes.
negotiating team that
Yes.
was establishing new defense. I was also an advisor to Sub-Council on Defense.
Okay, no, that's fine. Then that's clarified.
Thank you, Chairman.
So I understand why there was that smile on your on your face, Mr. Kabash.
Chairman, you give us a job to do in the back office, and we try to do the job as best we can.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. If we can then go back to the statement, and could you give the Chairman an impression, or the impression you were left with at the end of that integration negotiation process in relation to issues that mattered to transforming the DNA of this country? And I'm really focusing still on that period. So I'm really at about paragraph 7 of your statement, because these are issues, I believe, that were of particular import to DENEL as an organization.
Thank you, Advocate. Chairperson, the experience that those of us who were involved in this process had acquired was incredibly eye-opening with regard to the huge challenge that we faced with regard to transformation. We've got to understand as a country that when we were negotiating with the security forces, whether it was in the police environment, whether it was in the intelligence services environment, and in this instance particularly within the defense environment, we were negotiating with individuals that were at the forefront of the battle against our people, and of course not only inside the country but outside the country, in Angola, in Namibia, and elsewhere. It was hugely difficult to get together with the meeting of minds in terms of how we should approach this as a collective. And the number of interactions that we had, which obviously reflected the huge divide between those who came from what we call the statutory forces, the SADF, and those of us who came from the non-statutory forces. There were issues particularly around the level of professionalism, for example. They did not believe that we were capable of being the kind of professional soldiers that they were, for example. There was a huge amount of institutional racism, okay, in terms of whether during the negotiating process we should have been afforded the ranking systems that we should have, you know. And after the integration, it took a huge effort at all levels within the organization or within the military establishment to ensure that there were interventions that were put in place that not only managed to contain or maintain the institutional credibility of the organization going forward in a responsible way, but also ensuring that the interventions resulted in a level of transformation that reflected the democratic change. So through that process, obviously, I have had a huge amount of experience with how do you deal with not only organizational transformation, but human transformation at the individual level as well. And that boded well in terms of my future career with regard to how do we manage organizations where issues of transformation are extremely pertinent. And when I got to Denel, obviously I found an organization which was also steeped in a huge amount of transformation issues that was a throwback from the past, which I had to deal with when I got there. And this experience obviously prepared me well for that.
And this was over a decade since '94. 16 years or so in 2012.
Yes, Chair, pre-negotiations and during my stay
Yes.
in the National Defence Force.
Yes, but the point I'm clarifying is that the transformation challenges that you say you found at Denel when you were appointed there, those were challenges that were there even about 16 years into democracy.
Yes, Chair, that's
Yes,
correct.
thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Saluji, at paragraph 8, you say you were appointed a colonel. How old were you at this point in time?
I think I was 34 years old.
You must have been one of the youngest colonels in the force.
I think I was the chairperson, one of the youngest.
What
colonels
were you?
appointed.
I beg your pardon.
No, I think I was one of the youngest colonels in the Defence Force at that point.
What were your functions? What portfolio did you occupy? What were your daily or responsibilities?
When I was first appointed into the new National Defence Force, I was working in the office of the new Minister of Defence, who was Joe Modise at that point, as his personal staff officer and as an advisor on transformation issues in the Ministry of Defence. So I was actually working in the ministry at government level in uniform.
Then you continue at paragraph 9 to speak of these experiences. You're then promoted to the rank of Brigadier General. Again, what did that come with in terms of experience?
So because I was historically a soldier all my life, I was then working in the ministry and I wanted to go and pursue my career in the National Defence Force chairperson. So after a few months in the ministry, I asked to be relieved from the ministry to go back into the National Defence Force. And I went back into the National Defence Force on a full-time basis. And in order to gain the credibility of being a full-time professional soldier again, given all the transformation issues as I've indicated, there were few of us who had come from MK, who had right from the onset in 1994 decided that in order to prove that we are capable of performing the roles and responsibilities of the rank that we were given, and the level of professionalism that we thought we ought to display, that we would go through all the different courses that you should have done institutionally to get to the rank of colonel, for example. So in that period, I've done the South African Army Junior Command and Staff course. I've done the South African Air Force Senior Command and Staff course. I've done the Joint Staff course of the SANDF, which is now called the Executive National Security Program, which is probably the equivalent of a master's. So I've done every single critical course that is necessary for me to have been then appointed as a Brigadier General in 1998.
You then moved on, and I'll let you continue.
Sorry, so you say this was just to make sure that those who may have had different views about whether those people who came from the non-statutory forces, whether they had the necessary professionalism for the positions. It was just a way of shutting them up.
Precisely, Chairperson.
Yeah. Okay.
And as you explained, the courses you did were courses that junior officers really would have done already by the time you took the same course as a brigadier.
Absolutely, Kawash. I also just, sorry, if I may just, Chairperson, also my experience, and I think this is important also. So when I worked in the ministry and I worked at Shell House in the negotiations, I experienced or gained the experience of working at the political level and the highest strategic level of government. When I got to the army, I was obviously then working at an operational tactical level. And at some point in 1996, I was then transferred into the South African Air Force to be responsible for the transformation process in the South African Air Force and also to head the intelligence and operations systems when I became a brigadier general. So not only do I have experience at the strategic political level, having worked in the ministry and in government, I've also got a lot of experience in the landward environment, which is in the army. And also my stint in the Air Force gave me a huge amount of exposure to what we call the air environment that's in the Air Force. So it was, in a sense, an integrated approach across the spectrum of the military.
You said something earlier, and I just want to confirm. Did you say one of the courses that you did is equivalent to a master's degree?
Yes, Chairperson.
Yes. Which one is that one?
It's the Executive National Security Program. I know at some point the National Defense Force tried to get it accredited, but I don't know what happened with that process.
Yes, but it's
But my understanding is that
normally regarded as...
it's at a very high strategic level.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you.
You have, of course, noted those on your CV,
Yes.
which you have annexed to the papers as an extra RS2. There's a full CV there, Chairman. We will not go through it because really the experiences is
Yeah,
enumerating
no,
now
that's fine.
speak to these
That's
issues.
fine, yeah.
Can I then also just get a further sense before we move to paragraph 10 of the value you might have gained from being exposed to technology, technology, and then can you also just speak briefly about whatever you might have taken away from the defense review process, which I believe you said you had been involved in? I again say Denel is a global company. Technology is key, I'd like to think, to operations at Denel, and you needed to have a keen appreciation of this to be able to show leadership when you eventually got to Denel.
Thank you, Advocate Kabash. Chairperson, part of the responsibilities that I had whilst I was in the Defence Force, and also prior to that when we were looking at the establishment of the new National Defence Force, the defence review process had started then in terms of looking at how should this force be structured, both in terms of its personnel and in terms of the equipment that will align itself to the mandate of the National Defence Force. So the force structure, there were two critical elements of the defence review. The one was first of all, it derived from the mandate of the National Defence Force. It was a non-offensive defence force. We were not going to be an aggressor to anybody. We were there solely to protect the territorial integrity of the country and to assist in peace support missions if and when required by either multilateral or bilateral organizations, which South Africa was party to. So that mandate then cascaded down into what we call the force structure and the force design. The force structure was, in order to fulfill this mandate, what kind of force and how many people, and how many different units would you have? And then what do you use to equip those units, whether it is in the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy? So obviously from that process, I had a very good understanding of what were the technical product, equipment, systems, capability that was required by the National Defence Force in defense of the country and in fulfilling its mandate. And when we get to the Denel part, that's exactly what prepared me to understand what we needed to do with regard to strategic defense capabilities.
Thank you. Let's then go to the employment you secured at Saab South Africa. Please explain that to the chairman.
So-
What moved you out of the defense force and into the corporate world?
Thank you, Edward Kabash. Chairperson, I mean, I was still young at that point, you know. I've been a soldier my whole life. I had just started a new family. I mean, I had a newborn that was just born, and I was looking at the future as well. And I wanted to explore something. And I mean, one of my fortes was understanding the defense capability, industrial environment, the technology environment. And an opportunity came during that period. I was actually the CEO of a company that was bought by Saab Sweden. Saab, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, Saab Sweden, it's a defense and electronics company. They operate across the technology spectrum. It's one of the world's leading defense electronics companies. And I was employed by them between 2001 and 2010 in various capacities as CEO of some of the organizations, eventually also as the group executive responsible for marketing and business development in Sub-Saharan Africa. So for the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa, I was responsible for marketing and business development. And then eventually in 2010, given the role that I was playing in the organization and the interventions that I was responsible for, I went again through a recruitment process, internal recruitment process from my perspective, because I was in Saab already. And I was appointed by the Swedish company, by the head office in Sweden, as the group CEO of Saab in South Africa.
You then spent 9 years in the various divisions of Saab. That's my understanding of paragraph 10. And then you were elevated to the position of Group CEO of Saab SA. You spent 1 year in that particular position. Is that correct?
Yes, Kabash, it was just over one year and some months, yes.
Why did you leave Saab?
Well, at that point, sorry, before we get there, can I just deal with one other issue, and I think it's important, Chairperson, that during 2010 as well, when I joined Saab as a group CEO, there's an organization called AMD, the Aerospace, Maritime and Defense Organization. And that association represents all the defense industries in the country. It has a very strong relationship with the Department of Defense and Armsco as well. And it basically looks after the interests of the industry and how to promote its technology and its well-being, and also how to promote it outside of the country into the global environment. Okay? So it's a very important industry organization. And in 2010, because of my experience and the leadership role that I was playing in the industry, I was also appointed as the chairperson of the Aerospace Maritime Defense. And I think that's important because it is a milestone in my career as well. So, sorry, Kabash, you're saying...
Could you repeat your question, I think?
we were at the point at which, why did I leave Saab?
Yes, but I'm glad you dealt with paragraph 11 as well, because really that was part of your corporate experience, in a sense. So you work in the corporate environment, you're happy there. What made you leave Saab? What made you move back into essentially government?
So the position of Group CEO of Denel became available in around July 2011. And given my experience and also my continued commitment to the country, I mean, it was an opportunity that I thought I could use the skills that I had amassed over that period, the experience that I have, the networks of people, my relationship with the decision-making environment, my understanding of the political environment, not only locally, but in Africa, because of my experience in Sub-Saharan Africa, and internationally, that I had the profile and the credibility to lead an organization like Denel. I was aware of the challenges that Denel had, but I was quite confident that with my ability and my skills, that if I went to an organization, not will I only fulfill a responsibility and a commitment to my country that I'd fought for most of my life, but also the challenge of leading an organization as dynamic as Denel, because Denel is a dynamic organization. The human capital, the technology, it is exciting, and it cuts across the spectrum of technology within the air environment, the land, and the naval environment. So it was a huge challenge, and I was encouraged by family and friends and whatever else to say that this is an ideal job for you. Why don't you apply? And I proceeded then to apply for the job.
So you first heard about the job when you saw the ad, or had you heard about the job becoming vacant before that?
Everybody was talking about the fact that this job was becoming available. Okay, so it was in the industry, it was in Armscor, it was in the DOD. I mean, we all knew that the job was becoming available.
Did you know that the incumbent at the time, I think it would have been Mr. Sadiq, had elected not to reapply for the job?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Do you know him?
Yes.
Well, you would now,
Yeah,
but
because-
before you joined Denel, did you know him?
Yes.
He was just an acquaintance.
No, because when I was the group CEO of Saab, as a defense industry company, we all deal with Denel. So I met him during my period as the CEO of Saab, as the CEO of Denel.
Did you personally know any of the panel members who interviewed you for the job?
Of course, I mean, some of the board members there, for example, Mavuso Misimang, who was a board member, I mean, of course I know, he's a comrade from the ANC.
But there was no pressure put on you to apply for this particular
There
job?
was no pressure put.
It was entirely voluntary?
It was entirely voluntary, and I was looking forward to getting the job.
Was he the only one in the panel that you knew personally, Mr. Mavuso Msimang?
No, Chair, there was, I mean...
There were a few others.
Obviously, because of the industry, at different industry functions and at
yes.
different air shows and whatever else,
Yes.
I am acquainted with some of the people who were
Yes,
on the board of
yes.
Denel at that point.
Yeah, okay.
Of course, that appointment had to be approved by cabinet in any event.
Well, Chairperson, my understanding of the situation is that you go through and it was, I thought, a very rigorous selection process. The board then made a decision in terms of who was the preferred candidate. They make the recommendation to the minister takes it to cabinet, the cabinet ratifies that decision, and then the appointment is made. So it is a process that has to be gone through.
Nobody in cabinet encouraged you to apply for this position?
Not to my knowledge.
And do you know how many other candidates were or made themselves available and, well, maybe not everyone who made themselves available, but those who were interviewed, how many there are, not necessarily their names?
Chairperson, I wouldn't know exactly how, I mean, I think there were a few people.
You were a few,
There were
a few people.
definitely there were a few
Yeah,
people.
okay,
Yeah.
all right.
On being told of your appointment at Denel, one of the first people you interacted with was Miss Elizabeth Africa, because she was the company secretary.
Yes,
And when you joined Denel, you found that she'd been there a while.
yes,
The other person you found there was the CFO, Fikile Mhlonto.
that's correct.
In your statement, I think you said your interview took about 2 hours, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes,
Yes.
and you say it was a vigorous...
It was a thorough process.
Yes, yes, thank you.
And Miss Africa and Mr. Mhlonto are the same persons with whom you were suspended in September 2015.
That's correct.
I just wanted to close that loop. Who was the Minister of Public Enterprises when you assumed office?
The Minister of Public Enterprises Chair was Minister Malusi Gigaba at that point.
And the chairman of the board at that point in time?
It was Mr. Zoli Konene.
When did Minister Lynn Brown join the Denel? Or I beg your pardon, let me get this right. When did Minister Lynn Brown assume office as Minister of Public Enterprises?
It was, if I'm correct, it was around May 2014.
Then the other odd little fact that we'll come back to later on is just to establish that you arrived at Denel in January 2012.
That's correct.
And it was in January, I beg your pardon, it was in early 2012 that you were faced with assisting one of the divisions in taking a decision on whether or not to acquire a stake in LMT, one of the products they wanted to purchase.
I'm not sure because when I arrived, the LMT was already in the Denel stable.
I'll come back to that
Yeah.
with the detail on that, because it's the transaction that essentially was shepherded by Mr. Stefan Berger. And really part of it was also the purchase of the BAE LSSA, that transaction. I will come back to it.
Tabash, let's come back to that.
We'll come back to that.
Yes.
Because all I want to know is what your role was in assisting Denel take decisions on particular acquisitions that were material to Denel. But let's finish off the history and go back to paragraph 18, where you set out the standard process in appointing a GCO. You've dealt with that.
Yes.
You then said then Cabinet would approve, depending on whether they wanted to or not. And in 20, you then talk about your appointment. And at first, you were given a 3-year contract, you say?
That's correct.
Which contract was then extended for another 2 years?
That's correct.
That would have been what, in 2014?
So it's 2012, 2013.
Must be 2015.
The end of 2014, yes.
In fact, if you go to page 66 of the papers,
Well, 3 years would have been end of 2014.
Yes.
But if you add 2 years more, it would be end of
20.
2016.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Chairman, fortunately, there's a letter of appointment or a letter of extension, which
Yes.
is at page 66 of Annexure W4A, page 66.
Yes.
If you could just, it's a very short letter. If you could please read that into the record. So it's
So which one are you referring to?
the first file, which we call W4A. If
Yeah.
you go to page RS66, you'll find a letter there that's signed by the then chairman.
Yes.
Can you please read that into the record?
So where would you like me to start?
Right from the, it's a very short letter, Mr.
Yeah,
Saluti.
okay, so
Just
on behalf of the board, this is from the chairman of the board, and he's writing to me. He says, I'm pleased to announce that the shareholder has supported the board's decision to extend your contract from 3 years to 5 years. Your term of office will therefore be from 16 January 2012 to 16 January 2017. In arriving at the above decision, the board took into consideration your exceptional performance and leadership, the board's long-term view and strategy for the company, and to ensure stability in execution. We wish you the best of luck in achieving your targets and be assured that you have our full support in achieving these objectives.
so in essence, both the executing authority and the board were satisfied with your leadership of the executive management team when they extended your contract.
That's correct, as is indicated in the letter, Advocate Tabash.
Absolutely. And also,
And they say quite clearly that they thought you were doing an exceptional job.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Thank you.
can we then go to paragraphs 21 to 30, where you deal with Denel's strategic role? Please elaborate on this. If you could just take the chairman through those paragraphs. And as you do so, feel free to make reference to our Annexure RS4, which you note in these paragraphs. I too have looked at areas of Annexure RS4, and when it's convenient, I'll just point you to the particular areas that I think we should highlight for the chairman. But if you could just get going
Okay.
and just set out what you say in the statement for the chairman.
Chairperson, I'm sure in the previous witness testimonies, they have elaborated on some of the mandate of Denel.
Yes, they have.
And
Yes.
what were the key strategic issues that
Yes.
influenced Denel. I think,
Yes.
unless you want me to
You-
go through the entire thing, what is critical, and this is...
Yeah, I think you can point just what you consider to be important or important
think-
features. Yeah.
Chairperson, it is really important for us to understand the strategic value of Denel. Okay. Because we can talk about the fact that we need to have high technology and we need to invest in research and development, a transformed human capital environment. We need to ensure that we support the industrial base of the country from a defense perspective. Those are all issues that are also in the annual report that Advocate Kabashe was referring to, which we will come back to soon. What is important is to understand that Denel, as a state-owned company responsible for the defense capabilities of this country, the strategic defense capability, is the custodian of those capabilities. And if we allow those strategic capabilities to be in any way eroded, it impacts directly on the ability of the SANDF to fulfill its constitutional mandate, which is to protect the territorial integrity of this country. And that is why it is so critical that when we deal with an organization like Denel, there has to be the kind of sensitivity and the kind of importance attached to ensuring that we safeguard the interest of an organization like Denel. So, of course, Denel historically and in the world, in many developing countries, they don't have the kind of defense industrial capabilities that South Africa has. So when we integrated in 1994, historically because of the apartheid regime and sanctions busting, they acquired very key technologies and capabilities which were found in Denel when we got there. And our responsibility as a new government, as a new country, was also not only to maintain those capabilities because it gave us a strategic position as South Africa in terms of continuing the ability to defend ourselves in a credible way, and also to contribute to the foreign policy of our country. Because it is an instrument of foreign policy as well, how you use a defense force. And it gave us, as a country, that credibility with regard to our foreign policies. So it's a very critical thing. Now, if we understand anything, and this is the important point that I want to make, is that, and why is Denel so important, that if you have to have a functional defense force, okay, there are three critical elements that you need. It's what we call firepower, meaning the ability to execute an operation. It's the mobility of the equipment that can get you to the battlefield, whether it's air, land, or sea, so it's ships, tanks, or aircraft. And it's support and protection. Support, how do you maintain and support that equipment, and how do you protect that equipment? So without those three elements, you cannot have a national defense force that can operate optimally. And so that's why Denel's role was so key, because we provided many of those strategic capabilities. So during my tenure as Denel, okay, and that was the departure point for myself and the executive, and what led to the kind of strategy that we developed for turning Denel around, is how did we ensure that those strategic capabilities were maintained, both in terms of human resources and in terms of technology and equipment. And if you look at the Denel Integrated Report, which Advocate Kabashe has referred to, that report speaks directly to this responsibility of maintaining these capabilities. But to maintain those capabilities, you need to have an effective functioning organization. And that was my responsibility when I got there. It was, how do you make sure that Denel is profitable so you can have an asset base that can support these kind of technologies? How do you reduce the costs without having a significant detrimental effect on the human capital of the organization? How do you transform the organization in a responsible way so you don't lose the expertise that was there historically and the institutional memory that was there? how do you manage your stakeholder relationship and customer relationships, whether it's the DoD, whether it's external governments, whether it's external defense forces? That was a key element because we had to gain the confidence and the credibility within Denel of being a partner that can be trusted. And that was one of the key responsibilities that we had. And of course, because of my role previously, I was very well suited to ensuring that that relationship between Denel and its external stakeholders was increased significantly. So the key objectives were set out very clearly. Okay? It was increasing the order book, because if you did not have a revenue stream, you cannot maintain the level of investment that is required to maintain that organization. And of course, and rightly so, the defense budgets at that point were being cut because of our social responsibility and developmental needs. As a new democratic country, our resources had to be correctly diverted to programs to uplift our people in our country. So of course there were declining defense budgets, and we had to make sure that within those declining budgets, because we were not getting the kind of revenue from the local customer, where do we go and source other streams of revenue? And I think one of the successful things that we did was to create a balance between the revenue streams from the local customer and the international marketplace. And if you look at the report that is there, you'll see by the time of our suspension, we had roughly balanced. In fact, it was over, the international revenue streams were overtaking the local revenue streams by over 50%. And that is how one of the interventions that was critical for us in order to maintain this organization without relying on the state. So we'll get to it later. I mean, Denel was one of the few SOCs that never relied on a government bailout during the period that I was there. So, as we said, it was to increase investment in research and development, new technologies, and responsible and effective transformation, and create a dynamic organization and motivate the people, because the people at that point were also very demotivated because of the previous experiences that they had and the state of Denel at the point at which I got there. And as I've indicated, that the main purpose set out in the annual report was supplying the SANDF and the security environment more generally with strategic technologies, products and services, but also ensuring good governance and meeting the developmental needs of our country.
Now, the guarantee that you got from government, you found the guarantee there when you arrived.
Yes.
You say you didn't ask for bailouts from government, but I know that there was a guarantee that was in place.
Chairperson, when I arrived at Denel, there was already a government guarantee in place of 1.8 billion rand, and that underpinned our ability to contract and to raise money from financial institutions or whatever else. But we never ever went and asked for a bigger guarantee or for cash injection into Denel.
Yes, that explains it. Yes. Can I then take you to portions of the annual report that speak to the issues that you've just raised? And maybe it's convenient to start at page 70,
Yes.
which simply explains what the report is about. I'm not going to dwell on that at all. It's just to give context to what we're looking at. My first flag I then have at page 76. If you could just give the chairman a quick sense of how you try to maintain that balance of being a global player yet looking after the national interest. That's how I understood what this is.
So if you look at how do we contribute to the national interest and the national well-being of our country, and that also encapsulates the importance of an organization like Denel. It obviously has a very strong industrial development strategy because we want to contribute to the industrial base of this country, of our country. Okay? With regard to investments in R&D, and in fact during my tenure, for the first time in many years, we had started increasing investment in new R&D because a lot of the technology was become obsolete as well. If you wanted to compete in the model world...
Mr. Saluji, go a little closer to the mic.
Sorry.
Your voice is fading.
If you wanted to compete internationally you had to understand the new technologies because the modern battlefield continuously changes. Warfare changes. The strategy of warfare changes. If you look at the kind of political, geopolitical, security issues that have influenced technology over the last decade, 2 decades, the rapid change, you have to make sure that you are on top of research and development technology. And that's what we were trying to do at Denel as well.
In fact, I noticed that one of the board members in that period was a chap who was a specialist in the fourth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence.
Absolutely.
So somebody like that would have given you sufficient oversight and input to develop some of these ideas.
We had very close relationships with academic institutions, with the CSIR. In fact, one of when I got there for a short while, Professor Chilizi Marwala was also a member of the board who has extensive experience in the technology environment. So we were tasked with then how do we continue to sustain this industrial base? That was one. The other issue was also, how, as I said, with foreign policy, what is our contribution to the humanitarian involvement of our country? So when there have been conflict in Africa, for example, and our armed forces, our defense force, even today, which is deployed in certain parts of Africa, in peace support missions, in peacekeeping missions and that, if they are not able to perform there operationally and the equipment fails and they are not able to protect themselves and the people that have gone there to prevent conflict, we supply a lot of the weapons and the vehicles and the support for the aircraft, and the Denel supports it. So we're contributing in a significant way to our ability to ensure peace in Africa and sustainability in Africa as well. As I've indicated on that page, you'll see there's our contribution to national security and peacekeeping. Our ability to be globally competitive. And when I said that by the time I left Denel, our revenue streams from the international market were overtaking our local market. It's because we were globally competitive. In fact, at some point in the report, I've also said in my statement, it was the first time in the history of Denel that we entered the list of the top 100 global defense companies in the world. Okay, and that has never been achieved. For a company like Denel, the size of Denel in South Africa, to be competing at that level is a significant step and an accolade for us. And then, of course, from a human resources perspective, to make sure that we're an employee of choice, okay, that we develop our young talent, skills development. Human capital was a big thing in terms of succession planning, in terms of the bursary program that we had, in terms of our mentorship programs, internship programs. All of those were beginning to bear fruit during the period that we were there. And they were very dynamic programs, actually, because one of the problems we had was with succession planning. Because if the old skills base was leaving the organization, whether through natural attrition or whether because of the fact they did not want to work in Denel because it's the new South Africa, we had to ensure that our young people are going to be skilled to take over those responsibilities. And that was a huge issue that we had to deal with. And then, of course, in terms of, we were doing business in a lot of countries where offset programs were important. So for the first time, the business model also changed in terms of how do we strategically partner with other countries, not just selling them equipment and goods, but how we transfer skills, how do we establish manufacturing capabilities, and how do we partner with local companies in order to empower those countries that were giving us business as well. So the business model for doing business globally was also changing and evolving. And then, of course, a key issue was, for example, how are we responsible with regard to our social and ethics in terms of the environment? I mean, in Denel and the equipment that we produce, it's used for war. And we need to use it responsibility, and we need to see how we protect the environment and our people within that process. So that was a huge element from an ethical perspective of how do we conduct ourselves in a responsible manner that does not impact negatively on society and on the environment. So those were some of the kind of strategic contexts within which we were operating as Denel. And I think for the first time, it is a defense company that actually created a very strong consciousness about our responsibility as a defense company. Thank you.
Then I have a flag at page 78, which it's a point that underscores the extent of the dependence you had on government funding. But I think you've dealt with this. I don't know if you want to speak to the graph. I know you've spoken to the point.
Chairperson, I think the important thing, I'm quite sure that the other witnesses who were here may have touched on some of these things, but if you look at that graph there, it speaks for itself, okay? That from the point at which I got there, there was an upward trajectory, okay? And in terms of its performance with annual turnover, its profitability, and not only that, the corporate 5-year plan projected that we were going to just go from strength to strength. And what I need to point out right at the last column there is that we had a confirmed order book at the point at which I left. When I say confirmed, there's a difference between a confirmed order book and an order pipeline. An order pipeline is business that you are chasing and could materialize over a certain period. That's how you develop a budget. But a confirmed order book is orders that you have signed which are contracted for over a period of, say, 5 to 10 years, which means that you had enough order cover to maintain the organization for that period. Okay? And that was significant. I mean, it has never happened before.
If we then go to page 80, and this diagram here sets out the vision and strategic drivers of Denel. Maybe you just want to summarize what's here.
I think the vision is very clear. We have to be credible and we have to be a strategic partner to the National Defence Force to provide them with the capabilities. I think the drivers, as I've indicated, it was immediately the interventions that we required is to grow the revenue and improve our customer relationships, is to increase productivity, efficiency, and profit. You know, some of the contracts that Denel was engaged with when I got there were loss-making contracts because we were not delivering on time and to specification to the customer. It was a huge thing in terms of our productivity and our ability to execute programs and contracts effectively. So we had to do that, and that's why Denel was losing money. We were not executing contracts and programs to the level at which we were receiving revenue. We were losing revenue because of that. And of course, to enhance the capabilities because we had to keep up with new technology. And I think a very critical important driver was to create a dynamic and vibrant organization. And I think we achieved in doing that. I mean, Denel was a highly motivated organization at the point at which I left. And I think that the organization itself can bear testimony to that.
That is one thing that we've taken away from the people we have spoken to, who you led at Denel. They attest to the fact that your staff were very motivated. You picked them up from a point where they were ready to outperform their own expectations. And under your leadership, in colloquial terms, they were very happy campers. But if we then go to the next section, which I have flagged, and that deals with the outputs. Outputs are always important because, as I understand matters, the outputs are set out in the shareholder compact. So you have an annual shareholder compact that puts out certain KPIs and charges you to achieve certain things. And is this what this particular graph speaks to?
So what page are you on?
On 82, page 82.
So, would you like me to talk to that?
Yes, please. Just to give a sense of the extent to which you were able to meet, match, outdo the outputs that you had been charged with dealing with.
Are you referring to RSO 82?
RSO 82.
82.
Yes,
Denel
outputs, first Denel capabilities. Let's start there.
Okay, the two elements. The one was the shareholders compact, which is different from this. But in terms of, Chair, the capabilities, now, when we talk of strategic capabilities, what are the environments within which you have to have an integrated technology capability, product environment to address these fundamental areas? If you see there, artillery in any country is a strategic capability. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the G5 and the G6 artillery pieces, but anyway, the huge mounted or fixed cannons, okay, artillery pieces. Now, during the days of apartheid, they established these. And that capability, very few countries in the world have. And it's a strategic capability, okay? It gives you an advantage on the battlefield because of its capabilities and its operational efficiencies. So one of the key outputs was to maintain that capability. Okay. In terms of security and border control, for any country, it is a strategic capability. I'm not talking about fences and cameras and whatever else. I'm talking about high-end strategic technology, like unmanned aerial vehicles. Denel was one of the few countries in the world that possessed a capability like that. Okay? And that was, we had to make sure that we had that. Okay? An interesting fact, under border security and control, we've got something called mine clearing. In many conflict zones where the previous war, when those countries became free and war ended, huge parts of those countries, especially in the rural areas, were mined by explosives. And the ability to clear those explosives, one, was a technical challenge, and two, it was a huge humanitarian requirement because people were being killed walking and planting food in the fields. And Denel was one of the few companies, not only in the country, but in the world, that had top-level technology to do this kind of stuff. So it was contributing to security and border. On the naval side, okay, if you look at all the kind of equipment, the strategic equipment that is there, we've got a missile capability that you fit onto naval vessels that, again, very few countries have. Okay, that's just one example there. We are particularly good in the aerospace environment. Okay. You may have heard of the Roy Falk helicopter. Okay. During my period, now the Roy Falk helicopter is a combat helicopter. Okay. So it is armed and it has use in forced application in a conflict. Okay. So it's not to transport troops or logistics, it's actually to go and fight a war. That combat helicopter was obviously developed during the days of apartheid, but it was then one of the world's best performing combat helicopters, okay? And today it's still in service in Africa with the National Defense Force, okay? And performing a very admirable job. But it's come almost to the end of its life cycle. So it needed a huge investment to upgrade it because the technology was becoming obsolete. And while I was at Denel, one of the programs that I started working on together with the executive was a plan of how to do that, okay? Because if we do not do that and no investment, that capability will be lost within the next 5 years. Okay? So that's, and of course, in the maintenance and repair of aircraft, we are world class as well. In terms of our ability to make parts that build aircraft, we are also world class in terms of. In the landward environment, and this is also very important, in terms of armor protection and mobility, okay, we are a world class leader in combat vehicles. And that's, for example, where issues around the fabrication of hulls and combat vehicles comes. I mean, not only Denel, but many other companies in the country, in the defense environment, provide world-class vehicle combat technologies, okay, which are sought after internationally. And then, of course, our human capital, historically and even now, is sought after. There is right now, from what I understand, a huge brain drain going on in the defense industry, okay? And in Denel also, that people are going and being poached by other countries to come and work in their defense industries because of the expertise and the experience and the institutional memory that they are being headhunted to come in. And if we don't stem that, we will lose these capabilities, the institutional memory, and of course, the capability will erode. So we were tasked with this enormous responsibility for ensuring that not only do we maintain these capabilities, but that they will be enhanced and technology will be invested in for future generations to come. So it was a huge responsibility, and I think we were on our way to doing that.
Can we then look at page 89, which essentially deals with the operational excellence of the team, of the organization under your leadership. I had highlighted in my file that very first paragraph under operational excellence.
So, as I've indicated earlier on, Chairperson, one of the problems that Denel faced was that we were not executing our programs effectively enough. On time, on budget. So we were overrunning our budgets and we were not delivering to the customer on time. Okay, now if you read that during 2014-15, okay, during my period, Denel had successfully delivered against all our programs, okay, as evidenced by substantial growth in revenue and profitability. And that was revenue and profitability that came from operational performance. It did not come from a government bailout. It did not come from a tax break on a pension fund or whatever else. It came from how we were performing our work.
Now, the statement that you made about a few seconds ago, that you were not delivering on time and within budget, were you talking about the time before your time, that's what you found and then you changed? Or were you talking about what was happening at a certain stage during your time as well?
Chairperson, it was a combination of both. When I got there, there was this problem, and we had to intervene to fix this problem. Okay? To make sure that we were going to put into place interventions that we performed on time and on budget. And that continued for a while in my tenure because it couldn't change overnight. So that continued for another. So if you look at this, it's a 2014-15. So I got there in 2012. So it took us the better part of a year and a half to get this right. Okay.
But this represents that at that time, you changed the situation.
During that period, this is the result we achieved.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I note then that you also try to deal with transformation and gender issues. I look at the column on the right. Right at the top, you speak about the appointment of 2 women into key leadership positions as deputy CEOs. So you worked on the issue around transformation.
Edward Zabash, the thing is when Denel, and I don't think we need to mince our words, was historically a male Afrikaner-dominated institution, okay? And not in the years of democracy as well, not a lot had changed fundamentally. And when I got there, I had appointed at the senior level, not only having very robust transformation programs in the organization, but at leadership level as well. I had made sure that I had, with the support of the board, appointed deputy CEOs who were candidates from the black community who were put into very senior positions, which had hitherto not been done before. Amongst those appointments that I was instrumental in was 2 women deputy CEOs that I had appointed as well. And it was the first time in the history with a proper succession plan for each one of those, because they were deputies in most instances, well, in all instances, predominantly white males.
Did that not cause ructions within this rather conservative environment that you worked in?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the reactions was a lot of people were saying, what am I doing? You know, am I jeopardizing the organization by putting people who are not experienced into these things? But of course, I had a training program, I had a mentorship program, and I had to create an enabling environment to allow these individuals to play a meaningful role within the organization. And that's what we did. And of course, there was resistance to change from certain quarters. Some individuals did not appreciate the fact that they were now being deputized by black people. That's a fact. But I had always maintained from the day I got there that transformation is an imperative, but we will do it responsibly. And I've always maintained that we had done it responsibly because with the exception of a few individuals, I think the majority of people were very satisfied with the level of transformation and the manner in which we implemented it in the organization.
How did you manage the tensions with those few individuals? I'm assuming they were in key positions. How then did you manage those tensions? What in your experiences of the past 15 years or whatever helped you to deal with those issues?
Of course, the one was to be very patient and to be very inclusive in terms of how we developed a collective leadership. So people were not threatened by these interventions. So they continued in their positions in a responsible way, as I've indicated. There were certain individuals, and of course, given my background and the fact that I'm a group CEO, at some point you have to also be firm. And there was a point at which I'd indicated to certain individuals that if you do not want to fit into this organization, if you do not believe in the values of this organization, if you are not committed to transformation, and I've said that in Denel forums, in front of the staff, in front of the senior executive, that if you are not committed to this process of transformation that I have now outlined here, you are welcome to leave the organization. And that, I made it very clear.
In fact, one of the people we've spoken to said that you ran the organization, and this is just, it's not from a statement that's under oath, it's not from an affidavit, it's a comment made by this particular individual. You ran it in a very, very disciplinarian, you gave instruction, you treated it as if you were in the army.
Well, I cannot agree with that, but what I will agree with is that as a GCO and as a former military person, when a decision has to be made, a decision has to be made. I mean, you cannot have a situation where there's complete chaos that reigns. I mean, and I think you'd find that an exception, Advocate Kabashi. I think you will speak to most people in the organization, they will not have that view.
Yes, and this is why I say this particular individual has not given us a signed statement, never mind one presented under oath. But let's soldier on. I won't dwell too deeply into the financial director's report, which you've annexed as well, because we dealt with that in quite a bit of detail with the former chairperson, Marty Janse van Rensburg. It's really just to note, possibly on page 93, the positive results that are set out here. Page 93.
I mean, it's Advocate Chair, it speaks for itself. I mean,
I then took an interest in page 96. Risk management. It's always a key issue in any organization. Just give a quick synopsis of what it is that you were dealing with here.
I mean, given the nature of the business of Denel, the fact that we're dealing with sensitive equipment, as far as the hardware is concerned, there's huge amounts of processes and policies and procedures that you need to put in place to ensure that you de-risk the organization from an operational perspective. I mean, I don't know, you may be familiar, for example, I think it was last year or the year before, there was a huge explosion at one of the Denel explosive factories in the Western Cape. Now, if you don't, I'm not commenting on that reason for that. I'm just saying that that's the kind of risk you face within the organization at an operational technical level. And people get killed if you don't do things and have processes and policies and procedures, standard operating procedures in place. Also from managing, as I've indicated, the revenue stream and the budgets carefully, contractually. If you do not have mechanisms in place to ensure that you are continuously monitoring the performance of programs, and I'm not talking only programs where you're executing work for a client, but programs on research and development where you have invested money, that the cost overruns could be of such a nature that it has a severely detrimental effect. So Denel had a comprehensive, and it's not in here, but I mean, it's available, risk register and monitoring system, which was reported quarterly, not only to the Audit and Risk Committee, because the Audit and Risk Committee would then take it to the board to say that these are the risks in terms of these categories, red, amber, yellow, orange, green. And every single program, every single investment, every single risk category with regard to the human resources and the way we manage the business was an integrated and robust one. So, I mean, we manage risk in the organization. I think it's probably the area that that we had put a huge amount of emphasis with regard. It also then culminates in terms of how we manage the finances of the organization. Because if you manage your risk in the organization, and finance is one of them. We, for example, and I've said that during the years that I was there, after every AGM, we had clean audits from the Auditor General for every single year that I was there. Okay? And that is also a result of the risk management processes that we had in place.
Let's focus for a minute on the Audit and Risk Committee. And it might assist the Commission to understand how you, as the executive team, interacted with the Audit and Risk Committee. I ask the question because at some point I might ask you to give your comment on the composition of the Audit and Risk Committee that took office in July 2015. But let's start with exactly what these functions of the Audit and Risk Committee would be, and how you interface and interact with them, and how they added value to what you as management did.
The Audit and Risk Committee in any organization, whether it's in a state-owned company or whether it's in the private sector, is a very, very, probably the most critical instrument that you use to manage the organization from a governance perspective. At the Audit and Risk Committee, you've got to have a very clear skill set which will understand how the financials are being presented. What are the key financial risks in the business? What are issues around the balance sheet? What are the issues in terms of the liabilities of the organization, both in terms of its assets and in terms of its financial situation? It also then looks at, in depth, as to how we are performing on the programs that are bringing revenue into the country, to see whether we are performing according to our contractual obligations, where we are losing money. It also deals with things like fraud and corruption in the organization. It also deals with how are we managing our human resources in order for them to contribute in a positive way in terms of so the auditor said, have you got the skill set? This is not an HR issue. Have you got the skill set and the capacity to do the work? And if you don't have the capacity, what are the issues? So it plays a very critical role, and it is multidimensional. It requires individuals who have an understanding of finance, auditing, in some instance forensics. So it is a multifaceted responsibility, and you've got to be equipped to do that. But it also plays a very critical role in the sense that it keeps the management and executive in check and in balance. Because if the management and executive were involved in any kind of malfeasance or any kind of irresponsible activity, whether it's from a financial perspective or just the way we perform our business, that Audit and Risk Committee is tasked with that huge responsibility to ensure that we govern the company in the proper way. So, I mean, it's a big responsibility. Sorry, Advocate, if I may just, if you don't mind. It has the oversight of the executive and management, but in the absence of a good working relationship between the Audit and Risk Committee and the executive and management, if there's a level of distrust, if there's a level of suspicion, if there's animosity, if there's always adversarial relations within that relationship, you are not going to get the kind of results that you would expect in a collective, because there's going to be pushback from both sides. And you can create a situation where you create an environment of fear and intimidation. And I must say that the previous board prior to the 2015 board, both, and the four key individuals who interface with the Audit and Risk Committee is the Group CEO, the Group CFO, the Group Chief Operating Officer, and the Group Company Secretary. And those three key individuals, if they do not have a relationship with the Audit and Risk Committee which is based on confidence and mutual trust, there's no way that you could manage this in a proper way going forward. And I mean, as we'll come back to it later to see what the effect of this was.
would such a committee be almost like an executive committee of the board? When I say executive, that might be confused with executive management, but I don't mean people who are full-time. But I'm just imagining an organization which might have a certain committee at leadership level, that a smaller committee that deals with critical issues and reports back to a bigger body. So I don't remember seeing that at Denel there was any committee that may be called that. You might be able, in terms of the board, it was just the board and certain committees, including the Risk and Audit Committee. But I'm just wondering, in terms of its stature within the board, whether it can be seen as an equivalent of something that would be like an executive committee of a bigger organization, or not really.
Chairperson, I don't want to use this term, but maybe it is a way of describing it.
Yes.
It's probably it's first amongst equals.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
typically in a company,
Yes,
you'd have board subcommittees, which are the Audit and Risk Committee,
yes.
the Social and Ethics Committee,
Yeah.
and this is according to the King Report
Yeah.
and Governance
Yeah.
document requirements.
Yes,
Social and Ethics and Personnel and Remuneration.
yes.
Those are the three key subcommittees of
Yeah.
anything.
No, I think when you say it's first among equals, I think it answers my question. Yeah.
But Chair, I have to make one point.
Yes.
And this is very critical to understand the events that then took place. It does not fulfill an executive role.
Yes, no, I understand
Because if
that,
it
yeah.
does, and
Yeah.
if it starts giving instructions into the
Yeah.
organization at an operational level,
Yeah,
it is a complete conflict.
yes, no, I understand that, yeah. That's why when I mentioned executive committee, I emphasized that I'm not talking about executive as in executive management. Yeah, okay. But I think when you say first among equals, I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I then ask you to assist me in understanding the mandate of the Audit and Risk Committee when it comes to assessing transactions that the executive has identified? And I mean major transactions. To what extent must they be involved in assessing whether the risk element in those transactions, whether it's financial or otherwise? And I ask this again, foreshadowing what happened to the three of you, you and your colleagues, in relation to the LSSA transaction.
I think, can I answer, Chair, in two ways?
Yes.
When we talk about transactions, there are two levels of transactions, okay? And that's where the Audit and Risk Committee play an important role. The one is when you go and report on a quarterly basis to the Audit and Risk, there is the risk register with contracts and projects, the execution of a contract or a project, and how we are executing those contracts and projects, and the performance of the organization with regard to its execution.
I think your voice is going down. So,
Sorry,
so
sorry,
just
Chair.
raise it, yeah.
The other level of transaction that we refer to is acquisitions. Okay. When it comes to acquisitions, the Audit and Risk Committee, on behalf of the board, has to play a very critical role in overseeing how that transaction is being managed and how is it being implemented with regard to the governance issues around the transformation. But you could also have an instance where the board establish a committee which consists of the Audit and Risk Committee or members of the Audit and Risk Committee and other board members to oversee a particular transaction. But the role of the Audit and Risk Committee is critical because of the financial and auditing skills that they have to ensure that proper due diligence has been done, to ensure that proper financial and legal diligence is done. So it plays a critical role in that. And that's the kind of transactions that the board would really focus on.
So a risk and an audit committee should really consist of people who not only have the right skills and expertise that you have mentioned, but from what you have said, it seems to me it must be people who really are committed, very committed and strong on issues of proper governance and so on.
Yes, Chairperson, and preferably also having had some experience in having themselves have gone through some of these kind of transactions.
Yes, thank you.
In that context, what would the relationship between the CEO and the chairman be? And I don't want to lock that into just the assessment of risk or the discussion of risk. I'm actually curious as to how you related to the chairman of the board. What are there regular meetings that would take place? If you had difficulties, would you raise those with the chairman? I really am just curious about how you would be relating as the GCEO with the chairman of the Denel board.
Chairperson, I think there has to be an incredibly dynamic relationship between the chairperson of the board and the GCEO. Because if there is no relationship between those two individuals, you cannot effectively manage the organization and you cannot effectively get commitment from the executive to fulfill your strategic vision. Because the board lays down the strategic vision. But if the executive or the GCEO in this instance is not confident of the board having the correct vision, then it's not going to work. There also has to be constant communication, not to the point at which it becomes excessive, but there has to be constant communication in terms of updating the chairperson of the board with regard to certain critical matters that may arise in between board meetings. And if it is necessary, because remember, the formal board meetings are once a quarter. But between that, if it is necessary to convene a meeting with the chairperson and say a member of the Audit and Risk Committee or a member of the HR Committee, or if there's a critical matter that has arisen. We talked about risk earlier. The board doesn't like surprises. They don't want to wait until the board meeting at the end of the quarter to be told that we are losing huge amounts of money on a contract wherever, okay? Or that the budget that we had presented for this financial year is going to be severely impacted because we cannot meet our obligations. So we're not going to make the targets that we have set ourselves. So you've got to interact constantly with the board chairperson and any other board member that you think will assist in giving direction to resolving an issue. So, and there has to be confidence because if it's a team, it's a collective effort, and the collective responsibility does not only lie on the one side. Yes, the board has a very clear oversight role to ensure that the executive fulfills its mandate and executes properly. But similarly, the board has a responsibility to act responsibility towards the executive and the organization. The board cannot just come and do whatever it wants. They have their own responsibilities. So in as much as the executive reports to the board must also recognize, and it is critical that that is established as a principle, is that they have a clear responsibility towards the organization and its executive as well. So the relationship has to be very, very, as I call it, dynamic. It has to be, and it must be based on integrity and it must be based on credibility as well.
Chairman, I noticed that it is 11:15.
Yes. Let's take the short adjournment and we'll resume at 11:30. We adjourn.
All right.
in her portfolio, Denel is probably the best performing SOC. So, and of course, the targets that were achieved and what was contracted for, in most instances, we were well above it. I mean, I think in one or two instances, we were slightly short on that.
Well, when the former chairperson of the board was testifying yesterday, I commented that maybe if it was an examination for a degree, it would be more than summa cum laude. The pass would be more than summa cum laude. So there can be no doubt that the performance was excellent.
Thank you, Chair.
If we then move across to page 102, Mr. Saluji, operations. And it really was just to emphasize the point you've already made, 35 billion order book, and the possibility of converting the income stream by another 23 billion because of the opportunities. If you could just speak to that point
So,
briefly.
I think, Chairperson, when I talked earlier about the confirmed order book in excess of 35 billion, in addition to that, when I've also talked about the order pipeline, we were chasing another almost 23 billion rand of opportunities and contracts, not in the long term. Even if we had converted half of that 23 billion in addition to the 35 billion, I mean, we would have been well on our way to sustainability, at least for the next 5 to 10 years, without having to necessitate any kind of government intervention. So again, that speaks for itself in terms of the effort and the collective intervention and commitment we had to ensuring that we turn around Denel through a strategy that was supported by the board, that was supported by the stakeholders. I mean, if you talk to Armscor, if you talk to the DOD, if you talk to the Defence Force, you talk to clients internationally as well, I think they all supported Denel because of the manner in which we had gone around changing the business to become a successful, dynamic, vibrant organization. And this, again, speaks for itself. If you look at the issues that we were looking at, what was this based on? It was based on the fact that we had to make sure that we had better relationship with our clients and stakeholders, okay? We had to recruit the right skills for the new work that was coming in. We had to make sure that we had a pipeline of suppliers and subcontractors that could perform as well. Because it doesn't matter if Denel performs, but if the people that supply you with whatever you require to perform your work do not themselves perform, it is a huge problem. And that the plant and equipment and operational infrastructure needed to be upgraded and invested in so that it meets the demands of the new work that's coming in. So typically, the volume of work that was going to come in was of such a magnitude that we had to look at the possibility of buying new equipment as well. And then, of course, to continuously look at the business so that there is no stagnation that takes part. So these were the 5 pillars under which this order book was underpinned. And it shows that there was a very meticulous methodology on how we achieved this. It wasn't something that happened because of fortune or whatever else. There was a huge effort that was put into this. And again, it was multi-pronged. It was at the strategic level with our relationships. It was the confidence of the customer. It was the confidence of the decision makers that they can now contract Denel, confident that we will perform our work. So it was a combination of all of these things that brought us to this point.
Now, in that context, it's really patent that Denel had both a commercial and a strategic rationale or mandate amongst some of the important imperatives set out in the shareholder compact. One such imperative, of course, also being global reach, being global yet local. Because, of course, those subcontracting companies you interacted with locally were as important as the global reach that you tried to extend Denel into. In that context, how important was the Asian market to Denel? And I ask you the question within the context, again, of that historical time frame, 2014, 2015. How important was the Indian market to Denel? What consideration had your executive team given to extending globally towards Asia? I know I'm putting a lot of questions together, but they all form one core question, really. What consideration, what strategic value would possibly or could possibly be found in extending to Asia, India in particular?
Thank you, Albert Kabash. Chair, you know, in terms of the geopolitical demarcation of where our markets were and where we should focus on, okay, and we went through an extensive exercise when I got there, when we developed the strategy of how we want to turn around Denel. Of course, we looked at the world and we looked at the markets, and you do a thorough analysis of where the budgets are, which countries are spending. Again, also governed by the laws of our country, where you can work and where you can't work, okay, through the NCACC, the National Committee on Arms Control. I mean, we're talking now globally. So we had identified, obviously, the Middle East, because historically that was a region where a lot of work was done, particularly in the UAE and Saudi. And then, of course, South America, we had a strong relationship with Brazil. And we had, in India, we had a blacklisting that was in place well before my arrival at Denel. And I mean, we can get to it later if you want, Advocate.
That, of course, was lifted, or they started lifting it in 2014. Certainly the criminal investigation part of it was lifted
about
in
the first quarter of 2014.
Correct.
The judicial process was concluded, but the administrative process was not.
That too is correct.
So for 10 years, until 2014, we couldn't do business in Denel because Denel was blacklisted there, and eventually it was lifted because we had our own judicial processes, and Foreign Affairs was involved together with the authorities in India, and then eventually it was resolved, that problem, Chair. In Pakistan, we tried to do work for many years. We had some work there, but we were waiting for some substantial work to come out. And we were working, but we weren't making any progress, really. When I got to Denel, there was one large contract that was from Malaysia for Denel Land Systems. And essentially, that was probably the only big contract that we had in the East. And we had not really concentrated in that part of the world to a large extent because of the problems in India. We had one big contract from Malaysia. But our focus was to turn it around and establish a solid footing with work from the countries that we knew that were giving us orders at that point. So there wasn't a clear strategy or a plan for Asia Pacific, or India for that matter, because the ban was in place at that point still.
Would that mean then you also would not have had a wealth of information, a audit and risk committee, as happened with the 2015 audit and risk committee, that a structure like that would be able to tap into as they assessed for the board whether to expand into Asia, into India? So yes, so the question is, would you have had the kind of material in Denel for them to tap into and assess and decide on whether they should be setting up a Denel Asia or not, a Denel India or not? So it's the information I'm trying to explore.
Sorry, Advocate Kabash, are you talking about the fact that the Audit and Risk Committee would have had enough information at that point?
Well, we'll get there, but what I really want to know is, what did they find? What would they have found? What did you leave behind in respect of any exploratory work you might have done with trying to expand into the Asian market, into the Indian market? Did they find anything at all that they could work with?
There was no formal document. There was no Chair, there was no substance or substantial information that could allow you to take an informed decision about how do you want to enter that market. Okay, we had not done a thorough analysis at that point of that market, like we had done with other regions of the world. We knew that India was opening up, and we knew that we wanted to access other opportunities there, because when you go to defense exhibitions and that international, and that you start to get the feel of where the budgets are of different countries, and that we had some exploratory work in Thailand Indonesia and whatever else. But again, I said nothing. We were exploring work, but there was no document, a strategy document or a document that had done an analysis of that market, which would have allowed you to say that this is what we want to do in this market. There was nothing of that sort. There was no formal document or anything of that sort.
And then in terms of your budgetary cycle, you speak of the order book that you had. You speak of contracts that you, the resources that were going to become available to Denel. Would they have supported expansion in 2014, 2015 into the Asian market?
Chair, this order pipeline that we're talking about was an order pipeline that was not fundamentally based on Asia. It was based on other markets and where we're getting. So all the resources that will get to that. So we had not even created the capacity to explore that market. Well, we were exploring the market, but if we had substantial work that was coming in there, we would have had to expand the operations of Denel as well.
So you're essentially saying that when the 2015 board took office, when the Audit and Risk Committee of that board started assessing whether or not there should be some form of expansion into Asia, there's nothing that they would have found that your executive team would have been able to assist them with in that regard, because you hadn't started working on those areas.
That's correct, Chair.
Can I just compare that scenario to the acquisition of the BAE Land Systems acquisition? That would have taken you about, what, 17 months to negotiate, to work through, to put together, and then to place before the board?
Yes, Chair, that was the better part of a year and a half before we concluded that.
And when you look at the nature of the BAE transaction or that acquisition, and what was underway with respect to setting up a Denel Asia, a Denel India, how would you compare the size of those transactions?
I mean, if you look at the BAE LSSA transaction, Chair, it's complicated because there's a whole lot of legal issues, financial issues, technical issues, historical risks that's in the business that you've got to investigate. You have to look at the human capital, you've got to look at the asset base, the liabilities, the cash in the business. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of things that you've got to, and that takes a huge amount of time. And it takes professional expertise to help you to analyze and investigate that information so that you can make an informed decision as to whether this is a viable transaction or not. And that takes a long time. If you are going to establish a joint venture somewhere, you have to go through the same process. You've got to go through due diligence, you've got to go through an analysis, a legal process, and then you've got to go through the governance process with regard to applying for the proper applications through DPE, through the National Treasury, through all the relevant gates that need to be crossed before you get to this. You cannot accomplish something like that within 3 to 4 months. It's impossible to do that because of the administrative processes and bureaucracy that you need to go through. So to have concluded something within 3 months it would not have been possible. I don't think so.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Saluji, I have a couple more flags, but I think we need to move on in the interest of time. Unless there's anything else in particular that you'd want to point the chairman to in this annual report, I will move on to the next area.
Chair, this 2015 report, there is nothing more because I think you've gone through all the salient points, Advocate Gcabashe.
Yes.
What is important to note that to prepare a report like this is a huge effort. It takes huge amounts of diligence and insight in understanding of what is required for what we call an integrated report. Because remember, this now is reporting according to the standards of governance that has been set at the highest level. And just as a side remark, Chair, which may interest you, and I've mentioned it in my statement here, Stellenbosch University conducted a survey of state-owned companies in terms of their governance processes and their reporting. And Denel came out the top with regard to integrated reporting and governance processes, okay? And it was because of the quality of a report like this that we
Yes.
had won that accolade.
Yes, yes. And those conclusions by Stellenbosch, are they in some or other document here or not really?
Chair, they're not in here,
Yeah,
but it can be made available.
But they can be made available. I think if you can, please make them available through the legal team. Thank you. Did you get that, Ms. Kamash? I think you
did
may
not,
have.
but I noticed my colleague nod.
Yes,
So I was
yeah.
going to catch him. I
could
do
tell
apologize,
that,
Chair.
I could tell that you didn't get that. Yeah, no, I think Mr. Bam understood. Yeah, they will provide the document. Yeah.
I will speak with him during the lunch break.
He will share
Chairman.
with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I'll look at the transcript as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, if I may, there could be another document that could be of interest as well, is that in 2014-15, Deloitte also did evaluation of the performance of the board.
Yes.
And I don't know if the previous chairperson had mentioned it in her testimony, but I think it would be good to see that, because that also gives a good perspective on the
Yes.
performance of
Yes.
that board, the 2011
Yes.
board.
Yes. Well, she may or may not have, I'm not sure, but I'm sure that would be welcome if we don't already have it as well. So if you do have that document dealing with the performance of the evaluation of the performance of the board, that could be helpful as well. If we don't already have, I'm just not sure. Okay, thank you.
The board evaluation report, Chair, there is one that is in the pack.
Yes.
There was also one in the pack,
Yes.
Mr. Tlakudi's pack.
Yes, okay. He talked about a specific one, and you just have to check whether what we have is the same one or something different. Mr. Bam, do you know anything?
The two documents that Mr. Saluji refers to, the one is the Stellenbosch review document,
Yeah,
and the other one is a similar review by Deloitte.
yes,
Mr. Chairman, what we will do after today's hearing
yeah.
is chase up after getting those documents so we can have them sent to Advocate Lubashi as soon as possible.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Saluji, I think that we have sufficiently dealt with the annual report. You may now want to go to paragraph 28 of your statement.
So, Chairperson, if just to round up the whole Denel period and the tenure
Yes.
at Denel, if you look at in paragraph 28, we said that my responsibility was to develop a turnaround strategy for the organization, to effect its implementation, because I think that was a very critical element, is that the strategy is ineffective if you don't have the wherewithal and the collective and the leadership and the commitment to actually implement that strategy. I mean, as we know, in many instances, you can have the best policies, but if you, and that was a key thing, is not only to say that this was a strategy, but to lead the implementation as well. I'm just highlighting this because that is what kept me busy at Denel. These are the responsibilities.
Yes, okay.
It was to increase the profitability through new business and controlling the cost base. Denel was a huge organization. We were spending huge amounts of money, but the revenue was not justifying that cost base. It was to invest in new technologies and to update existing technologies and products. And a critical addition to that was to invest in developing and empowering the human capital of the company. Because the people were the critical element. If we did not nurture, create an enabling environment for the people, all of these other issues would not have fallen in place. It was also to ensure, again, and I use the term responsible transformation, because we did not want to create a situation which had happened in Denel prior to my getting there, some time back, where there was a wholesale transformation process which alienated many of the skilled people from there who had left Denel at that point. And it created a brain drain which Denel was still suffering at that point. So we said it has to be responsible transformation. ensure effective stakeholder management, okay, to the point at which it was the first time under my tenure we are about to sign a strategic partnering agreement between the Department of Defense, Arms Corps, and Denel to locate the importance of Denel within that tripartite alliance. Because before that, it was an ad hoc relationship. Denel was being treated as any other defense company. And we said, no, you cannot do that. Denel has a special status in this environment. We are the custodians of strategic capabilities. And you've got to formalize and institutionalize it so that there has to be structural interventions that will give effect to this. Because if you treat Denel the same way you treat everybody else, what is the strategic value of Denel? And we were about to sign that document. It was also based on the defense review and in terms of the strategic capabilities that were identified there. That never materialized after my departure.
I believe you've dealt with a lot of the other matters
Yes.
that arise. If you could go to paragraph 34, as long as you're comfortable that the issues that are between paragraph 29 and 33, you have in fact dealt with. I believe you have. Can we look at paragraph 34 of your statement? That's on page 8. And
So-
you were starting to talk about the significant stakeholders.
So, Chairperson, I think one of the key issues about a successful endeavor to create confidence within the client base is to make sure that there is confidence and credibility within the stakeholder environment. And to a large extent, because of the performance historically of Denel, a lot of entities or stakeholders had lost confidence in the ability of Denel to perform properly. One of my key responsibilities was to re-establish those relationships. Given my history and the nature of my background and the experience that I had, and my role in AMT previously, I fulfilled that role to a large extent as a responsibility in the Group CEO's office. Together with, for example, Fikile Mhlonto, who was excellent in terms of his relationship with the financial institutions. I mean, I have a very good understanding of financial data and information and processes and whatever else, but I'm not a chartered accountant, I'm not the CFO. I relied on my CFO to give me that level of information and the integrity of that information so that we could make informed decisions together about how we should manage the finances of the organization. Part of that process, and I think it's important, Tabasha, that I mention this, is that prior to me getting there, there was a real difficulty in raising funds to underpin the contracts and the business of Denel. So we used to rely on financial institutions to fund some of the projects and fund Denel's operations. And every year, and that was also previously the case, the CFO would organize a roadshow with all the key financial institutions where we had to go, where I personally, with him, had to go and present the Denel strategy and vision going forward. And I must say that for the first time after many, many years, in the 2014-15 roadshows that we had, that the financial institutions were extremely happy with the performance of Denel and were willing and in a position to collaborate and support us going forward, which was not the case prior to that. So as I've indicated, the Department of Defense, we had an extremely good relationship with our shareholder. I think when Mr. Tlakudi gave his evidence here, I think it may have come across that there was a good rapport between the executive and the officials in the department in terms of how we managed the relationship. In all the different instances where we interacted, whether it was in foreign trade shows where we had to negotiate with the DTI about our presence in a defense exhibition internationally, whether it was National Treasury, and even Parliament. I was going to Parliament once a year to go and report on the status of Denel. We had just the utmost amount of support from those institutions about the work that we were doing in Denel. And I think it's important because it wasn't one instance that said that Denel was doing well and another instance that said this is not necessarily accurate. It was the collective institutions that we were interacting with which were saying that Denel, after a long while, was on a road to recovery and was doing a good job.
In fact, you got quite a few awards as a result of the track record that you had.
Yes. So there, of course, we refer to the Stellenbosch report as well, which we will make available, which was a huge accolade for us. And I think what is critical also, Chair, and Advocate Kabash, in 36, in the time that I was at Denel, every year we received clean and unqualified audits from the Auditor General. Okay. And that was also a huge step forward in terms of the performance of Denel.
Do you know what the position may have been during the time or before your time in terms of auditors' reports in terms of Denel? Do you know what the situation was, even if not for each and every year, but what the position was in terms of getting qualified or unqualified audit reports?
Chair, I would be misrepresenting it if I knew exactly what it was. What I do know was that there were huge issues that we had when I got there,
yes,
which we were told that we need to identify, well,
Yes.
they had identified and
Yes.
put corrective measures in place.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
And that's what we did.
Which you did.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
From paragraph 37, you address matters that are of particular interest to the Commission. You've titled this section, Denel and State Capture. Please slowly take the chairman through what happened as you joined Denel through to the time that you left.
Thank you, Advocate Kabas. Chair, the reason why we are here, why I'm here as the former CEO, and I think the existence of the Commission as well, is to look at this notion of state capture. And I think what is important is what I'm going to say here gives some insight into what occurred at Denel as well. Also, I think it will also give a good indication of the kind of experience that we went through, which led eventually to our leaving Denel as well.
Just continue to try and raise your voice so that
Thank you.
everybody can hear you.
Thank you. So by 2012, when I got to Denel, already by then, obviously, I was aware of the Gupta family and Salim Essa in terms of the press reports and all the publicity that was going on around them. Okay. So I wasn't unaware of the Gupta family and the role of Salim Essa in terms of some of the issues that were in the public domain.
I will just interrupt you now and again. I'd like to know whether during your term of office at SARB you had met Salim Essa.
I have met him in public places and that before that. So, I mean, I was familiar with him, but
You knew who he was.
I knew who he was, yes.
At no stage did he make any overtures regarding the businesses that you were running.
No, it was purely in terms of an acquaintance. Well, we met and we talked, and he knew who I was, I knew who he was.
Yes, continue.
So shortly after my appointment in the first quarter of 2012, I can't exactly, I was contacted by Essa, and he indicated that he would like me to meet some people, and it would be in Denel's interest and in my interest to meet these people.
Did he explain why it would be in your interest? I'm assuming your personal interest is what he was talking about.
Well, my interpretation, Chair, was that my interest so that I could further
Yeah,
the interest
official.
of Denel. You know? So
Yeah.
whether he meant it in my personal interest, I took it that it was in my interest, in the interest of Denel.
Yeah, your interest in your capacity as GCEO of Denel.
That's the way I interpret it.
Yeah, okay.
And he also had indicated that it would be important to attend such a meeting because of the fact that it had the support at the highest level. Okay.
So that's how we put it. He had support at the highest level.
Yeah, and it would be in the interest of Denel and myself that I attend a meeting of this nature.
Yes, okay.
So, but also at the same time, at that point, notwithstanding the fact that there were all this publicity and that it wasn't unusual for me to interact with people who wanted to do business with Denel. I mean, it was a normal practice that people called or made appointments to come and see me. And we had many meetings of this kind with other institutions or entities, which really led to nothing in most instances. In some instances, yeah, if it was a credible thing, it led to some business with Denel.
Can I just interrupt
Yeah,
again, just
yes.
to get absolute clarity on the point? So when he spoke about the highest level or the very top, what was your interpretation of how high was the very top?
Kabasha, Chair, I mean, I think with all the publicity surrounding the relationship between the Guptas and Essa's involvement and whatever else, if he says then that the very top, I meant the very top, you know, in terms of at the political level, right at the head of the executive.
So that would have been the President of the Republic of South Africa.
That was my interpretation of it.
Thank you.
Chair, I've also just got to say, you know, in terms of the defense industry, there's many people want to come and interact with the defense industry because of the fact that they think it is hugely lucrative, firstly, and secondly, that the turnaround in terms of making money is very short, okay? And that when they talk of big defense companies and individuals who have become rich through the defense industry, that it is a very attractive industry. And yes, in the long term it can be. But in order to get a foothold and in order to then do business, sometimes a business contract can take 3 to 5 years to mature and another 5 years to execute. It's a long-term commitment and process this. So people have a misunderstanding and a misconception of how well you can do in this industry in a short space of time. And I need to make that in the context of what I'm going to say now. So I agreed to go to the meeting with him. He picked me up at the coffee shop in Oaklands, in Johannesburg. And he,
Did he tell you in advance where the meeting would be?
yeah, no, he said to me, no, not the meeting. He said, I'll pick you up here and then we'll go to the meeting.
Oh, okay. So when he picked you up, you didn't know as
At that
yet
point, I didn't.
where the venue would be?
I didn't know.
Okay.
And then he picked me up and we drove, and then he drove me to the Gupta residence in Saxonwood. Okay. I was not aware that that was the residence at that point in time. Okay. But he had informed me that it was, and he said, don't worry. Again, he said, this is the support of the very top. Okay.
And this is after you had gotten into his car and you're driving
Yes.
towards Saxonwold. Yes.
So then we get to the place and we go inside, and I am taken into a room, and I'm introduced to Tony Gupta. Tony Rajesh Gupta. That's
Yes.
okay. It's the first time I met with Tony Gupta.
Had you met with any of the Gupta family
Never.
prior to this?
Not.
Yes.
So we engage in pleasantries, and he says, how are you, and whatever else. And then shortly after that, Tony escorts me into another room. Okay, so we leave that room, we go into another room. In that room, he introduces me to he says, this is my brother. Okay. And he doesn't say who the brother is, he just said, this is my brother. And the brother greets me, he says, hello Riaz, how are you? And I said, I'm fine. And then he turns around, and in the room was also Minister Malusi Gigaba. Okay. And then he says to Minister Gigaba, this is the new CEO of Denel, this is the new guy, Riaz. Okay. And all Minister Gigaba said is, hello, how are you, Riaz? Okay, that was it. And there was not a further exchange there was no discussion about Denel or anything of that sort. It was just an introduction. And if I recall, Minister Gigaba said, oh, these are my friends. He hopes that at some point, if there is anything we can do with them, it would be good. And that was it.
Please just repeat that. He said what?
He said, no,
At
these
some
are my
stage.
friends. And if at some point there is anything that you can assist them with, that's fine. That would be good.
That is the one that I'm missing, the earlier one. Did you say, these are my friends? Or
Yes,
these are
he said,
friends or something like
These
that?
are friends.
Yes, okay.
These are friends. And if at some point there is something you can do together with them in Denel, it would be good.
Okay.
Something to that effect. The meeting was very short, and this person who I later found out was Atul, he was just talking, asked me, how's Denel, how's it going, and whatever else. I said, it's fine, I'm settling in and whatever else. And we shook hands and we left. And Essa took me back in his car to the coffee shop where he picked me up. And on the way he said, don't worry about this, these are good people, it's okay.
That's
Essa.
Mr. Essa.
Yeah.
Can I ask you this? When Atul spoke and said to the minister, Minister, you know this guy, he is your new Denel GCEO. Did you get the impression that he was communicating the idea that he, Atul, had had a hand in ensuring that you were selected for appointment? Do you think he was trying to attribute the fact that you were now the GC?
Well, Mr. Rashid, don't you want to ask the question in another way that seems to be
Am I leading him?
very leading? Well,
Chairman.
have you found a way?
I believe I have, but
Okay.
Chairman, your prerogative always.
No, it's fine if you have found. Yeah.
What do you believe Mr. Atul Gupta was communicating to the minister at this point in time?
What he was communicating to the minister.
To the yes. Other than just, were there any undercurrents to what he was saying? Was it more than just meet this chap?
No, Chair, I think it was meeting this person, and the fact that I was there without having known that I was going to that place, I think he was trying to show to me, that's what I read, that he had a relationship with my political principle. I mean, that's what I read into it. I didn't read that he was saying to the minister that he had instructed me to come there or because of any other reason.
I'm really interested in the dynamic between Mr. Atul Gupta and the minister, and trying to decide on who was the subordinate in that relationship, who was doing who a favor in this relationship. You may not have gotten a sense of that at all.
Chair, I did not. I mean,
Before you were picked up by Mr. Essa to the meeting, is my understanding correct that he had asked you to come to a meeting? One, he had not told you where the meeting would be, and two, he had not told you what the meeting was going to be about, or do I misunderstand something?
no, Chair, sorry. He had said he wants me to go to a meeting because there were people who it would be in the interest of Denel to meet because they could further the business of Denel. I mean, that was primarily the reason.
So he had said he wanted you to meet certain people because meeting those people would be in the interests of Denel if you met those people.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
You must just say if I'm not getting it right. I just
No,
want
that's
to
right.
understand it correctly. So you went there because you were going to meet these people that he was saying, if you as GCO of Denel met them, that would be in the interests of Denel.
Exactly.
Yes. He didn't tell you in advance who those people were.
No, he did
And
not.
you didn't ask.
No, I did not.
Okay. He picks you up at a coffee shop in Oaklands, and then you proceed. And at what stage, or did he tell you on the way before you reached the destination what those people were that you were going to
Yes,
meet?
as I've indicated, when he picked me up when we were in the car, he indicated where he's taking me to and who the people are.
Yes. So he told you where you were going.
Yes.
Yeah. But he didn't tell you in specific terms about, for example, the minister. He just
No,
told
no.
you were going to the Gupta residence.
Yes, I was not, there was no
Yes.
indication of
Yeah.
who I was going to meet there.
Yeah. So, but you, from the fact that the destination was the Gupta residence, you could tell, okay, we are going to meet the Gupta family.
That's correct.
Yes. Okay. And then you came into the Gupta residence. Firstly, you were put in one room, and then later on you were taken to another room where Minister Gigaba was at the time. He was Minister of Public Enterprises at the time. And in that room where Mr. Gigaba was, ultimately it was yourself, Mr. Gigaba, and was it Atul?
Atul.
Only the three of you?
Yes.
Okay. And all that happened really was that he seemed to introduce you to Mr. Gigaba. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Yes. And what else?
No, as I've indicated, Chair, I mean, there was small talk about him asking me how things are going at Denel, how am I settling in at Denel,
Yes.
and that he hopes that that they will see me soon again.
Yes. And what did you conclude was the purpose of this meeting, if you did think about it even afterwards and conclude? What did you conclude was the purpose of this meeting?
Chair, my only view on this thing was that it was a display of the influence that they had and the extent of that influence. Okay. I mean, here I was asked to go to a meeting, ostensibly to discuss with people who were going to further the interests of Denel. And when I get to the meeting, I'm confronted with this. And the only conclusion that I could come to at that point was, in a sense, it was a show of force.
How long did you think the meeting lasted?
Probably in total, having got there and in the meeting itself, probably about 7 minutes, if that,
Yeah.
7, 10 minutes, not even.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Then you drove back to Oaklands with Essa, and you left to go to Denel.
Yes, that's correct.
At paragraph 48,
I'm sorry, before you do that, from what you have said, I think there are two things that Mr. Gigaba said at that meeting that you have testified to. One, he greeted you, he said, "Hello, Riaz," or something like that. Yeah, after Mr. Atul Gupta had introduced you to him. Is that right?
Yes.
That was the first thing he said.
Yes, Chair.
But he said something like, also like, these are friends, and something like if you can work together, or I can't remember how you put it, but he
If you
said
could
something.
work together in the future, it would be
Yes.
good.
Yes. And that's about all that he said in that meeting.
That's it.
Yes. What was your understanding of that message from him, if you had any particular understanding for it?
I mean, Chair, there was no implicit view or connotation that you've got to do anything.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, it was
So-
just, if there's working together, you can work together.
That's-
But basically, everything was left to both parties if they will find a way of working together.
That's correct.
There was no instruction or anything like that.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, okay, thank you.
if you could then speak to what you've written in paragraph 48.
But having interacted at that level, Chair, it became obvious. I mean, you don't come into an environment where you're called to a meeting. I didn't know who I was going to see. In the meeting, I'm introduced to my political principle. There was only one clear message there, is that we have influence. Okay. I mean, there was no other way of me interpreting. As I've indicated, from my perspective, it was a show of force on their part to say that this is the level at which we interact.
Let me go back to the statement by Mr. Gigaba. I think if I understood you correctly, one of the statements he made was, these are friends. Was your understanding of that statement that he was meaning that these are his friends, or what was your understanding of that statement? Or he meant to say you must regard them as friends or what? Or any other meaning that I might not have thought of now.
Chair, the only way I could interpret that was that he was acquainted with them. The extent
Yes.
of which the acquaintance was, I cannot comment on that.
Yes, yeah. No, that's fine. Sometimes people can make statements and you don't make much out of it, and sometimes you do. That's why I just wanted to find out whether you had a particular understanding that you attached to it. But what you are saying is your understanding that he was saying these were acquaintances, and you can't take it further than that.
That's correct.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Bashe.
Yes, so we are back to paragraph 48, Mr. Saluji. Just to speak to what you've written in this paragraph.
So as I've indicated there, that it was very clear that they wanted to show me, Chair, that they had the support at the high political level. And there was reference kept on being made by ESSA, even when we were in the car, that it has the support of the highest level, which I had interpreted to mean at the highest level of executive, in this instance, the president, the former president.
And of course, you knew that Mr. Gigaba was a minister in Mr. Zuma's cabinet, and you were very much aware that talk in the public media was that the president was very close to the Gupta family.
That's correct, yes.
You've said that. But you also go on to explain in that paragraph 48 that you had not personally met President Zuma.
Chair,
You
obviously,
did not know him is the word you use.
Advocate Tabashe and Chair. We were in the ANC together. Obviously, the former president was long before me in the ANC, because I'm obviously much younger. But in terms of what he was responsible for and where I was located within the ANC and MK structures were in very different regions and in different structures. So in my time in exile, I've never had an opportunity to meet him as well. Neither have I ever met him since we came back in 1994. So I had never met the president before that.
Let's move on to paragraph 49. ESSA contacts you again. And I'm interested in the use of the word summoned. You say he summoned me to a meeting at the Gupta residence. And later on you speak of being compelled, feeling that you had to attend that meeting. Is this a deliberate word of the use summoned, is my first question, but joined to that question, why did you feel compelled to attend the meeting?
Chair, I think given the context which was laid earlier, and this was a few weeks later, okay, and I must say I was extremely reticent about engaging with ESSA, but eventually I agreed because he had said that we want you to come to a meeting, okay? And within the context of which I've just described with regard to what happened earlier on, I felt that there was some pressure being put on me to engage again. And as I've indicated there, I was very reluctant to attend, but there were issues also which I had to take into account myself. The fact is that I've been in many situations where it has been difficult, okay? And I genuinely believe that I'm going to listen to what they've got to say, but I will be able to manage this thing. And I was clear as there was also an element to know, what do these people want?
Two questions arise from that. The first is the fact that you had met Mr. Gigaba at your last visit to Saxonwold, to the Gupta Saxonwold resident, did that fact influence your decision this time, you say a few weeks later, to go again?
Chair, it obviously played a part in it. I would be naive to say that it did not play a part in it.
My second,
And before Mr. Bashe continues, I'm just going back on your statement to paragraph 38 and 39. You don't necessarily need to go back, but you may if you want to. I see that in 39 you say that Mr. Essa said the request for you to meet people that could assist Denel, and that's page 9 of your statement. The request for you to meet the people that he said it would be in Denel's interest to meet. I see in your statement that you say he said to you that this request came from, in quotes, the very top, close quotes. So you may or may not have articulated that in your oral evidence, but I didn't hear it. I just want you to confirm that that is so.
My reading was that he said it had come from the top.
Yes.
Yes.
The request came from the top.
Request.
Yes.
And I don't know whether he was putting a spin on it or not, but that's the words he used.
Yes. No. I just in terms of what he said to you,
Yes.
whether it was true or not, we don't know. But in terms of what he said to you, okay. Thank you. We can then go back to the next to the second visit.
The next question relating to the second visit is, did you consider asking Mr. Essa to come to your office instead of you going to meet him and going to the Gupta residence? Did you give that proposition any consideration?
I did. Chair, I must say that given what had happened in the prior to this request, I was not comfortable asking Essa to come to the Denel offices, not with what had gone on before.
When
Please
you say gone on before, you mean
No,
the first meeting?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. Why?
Because here was an individual who had set up a meeting for me, which I was not aware that I was going to meet my political principal. And then he requests another meeting to come there. I thought it was within the context of continuing the discussion that they wanted to have with me following the last interaction. And I was just not comfortable with inviting him to the Denel offices.
Yes, I just want to understand the source of your discomfort in inviting him to your office. One approach might be, well, we held the first meeting at the Gupta residence. Let's hold the second meeting at my office. That could be a legitimate approach. So, but from what you are saying, you say you were uncomfortable about inviting him to your office. I just want to understand the source of your discomfort.
Well, the source of my discomfort was precisely what I've said earlier, is that when I got to the first meeting and I found my political principal there, I needed to have a better understanding of what they wanted to do. And when he phoned, he said that we, in a sense, not summoning, but the tone that he uses to say, you've got to come to this meeting, okay?
I understand. I understand him either asking you, him wanting the meeting to be at the Gupta residence or somewhere other than your office. I can understand that. But from his point of view, but I'm not understanding why you would be uncomfortable to say, let's hold the meeting in my office. That's what I want to understand. Was it because you thought, since in the first meeting you found your political principal there, maybe this time too he will be there, and you thought that if he is going to be there, you'd rather go to where he is? Or did you think that, or is the position that you didn't want people at Denel to see Essa or the Gupta people coming into Denel? That's what I want to understand, where your discomfort
Chair, so it
came
was,
from.
I think, when he had said that I must come there, he said, we want you to come there. So I don't know who was there going to be at the meeting. And the second thing, yes, I would have not been comfortable with the Guptas walking around the corridors corridors of Denel, and also within the context of the previous meeting.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Now, these meetings, these first two meetings happened what? Within the first 6 months of your appointment? Can you recall?
Yeah, more or less within that time frame.
Within the first 6 months of your appointment. You then proceed to say that you actually went to the meeting at 50, and then take it from there. Let me not give evidence on your behalf. I'm at paragraph 50 of your
50.
statement.
Thanks, Edward Kulash. Chair, so when I get to the meeting this time, obviously I knew where the place was, so I drove myself. When I get into the room there, Tony, Gupta, and Essa are present there. Okay. But there was also another individual who was there, and I was introduced to the individual there as Duduzane Zuma. Okay. And later there was another individual who walked into the room but was there for a short while, who Tony Gupta said to me, this is Ace Magashule's son, okay, the Premier of the Free State. But he had left
Yes,
shortly
he
after.
didn't stay.
He didn't stay.
Yes.
And in this meeting, Essa he took the lead, okay, and which I found absolutely amazing, because he said to me that I should understand that they had supported my appointment. Okay. Supported.
He said they had supported,
They
your
supported.
appointment.
Yeah. They had supported it, okay. Now I found this very surprising, because I'm sitting in a room here, and the opening statement is that he's made this. Notwithstanding the fact that I had gone through a rigorous process with the previous board, okay, the job was advertised, I applied for the job, I had gone through the process, the previous board, the 2011 board, had made a recommendation to the minister took it to cabinet, and it was then ratified by cabinet, okay. So, I mean, I must say, I was extremely surprised when he made this statement.
Can I just take you back for a sec to paragraph 50? And in relation to Ace Magashule's son, what is it that they said to you about him?
If I recall, they said, oh, he works with us. That's all they said. Something to that effect.
But as you say, he didn't stay very long. But Duduzane Zuma remained in that meeting.
Yes. Chair, I must say, for the better part of the meeting he was there. He may have left at some point, but he was there.
Yes, yeah.
Did he say anything at all, other than greet you, I presume? This is Duduzane Zuma?
No, I mean, he kept quiet for most of the meeting, I think. He didn't, the lead in the meeting was Essa, and then, of course, at some point, but it was Essa specifically who took the lead.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you're in this meeting, are you sitting in a room that's a lounge? Are you sitting in a room that looks like a boardroom? Are you sitting? Are people taking notes, or is it just a conversation? Could you just describe that environment?
No, it's Chair, it's a lounge. I mean, the people are sitting
Yes.
there. It's very informal. There's nothing
Yeah.
formal about it. And it's not,
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, earlier on you were commenting on the fact that Mr. Essa said that they had supported your appointment, and you were saying, you know, you thought about the fact that you went through a rigorous, a very, you know, a transparent process. You told me earlier on that interview that you were subjected to for the job of GCEO of Denel lasted about 2 hours. And we know now, you know, but you would have known at the time, even at the time of the interview, what you were capable of. We know now with the evidence that was given by the former chairperson yesterday, and with the reports of the performance of Denel under your leadership, we know that the decision to appoint you must have been right because of the performance that you subsequently showed, but you would have known even at the time of the interview what you were capable of.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, yes.
Yes, I interrupted you as you were going through paragraph 51. You had gone halfway through that paragraph. Please continue.
So, to say the least, I mean, I was taken aback when he makes a statement like this, Chair. But what was more interesting, and he was laying some context for the discussion to go forward, and then he said that they also, and he kept on saying that they had the support of number one and the old man. Okay. So I'm sitting in the room, the son is there, Tony Gupta is there, Essa is there. Okay.
And previously, the minister had been there.
Yes. And essentially, he then took the lead, as I've indicated, and he said they want to do business with Denel, and they want to assist Denel to acquire new businesses in other markets. And he specifically mentioned the Middle East and Asia.
And this was Essa who was speaking.
This is Essa speaking. Okay. So Asia comes onto the table for the first time as well.
Is your recollection quite clear about him having said this was coming from number one and the reference to the old man? You are quite clear in terms of your recollection that that was what was said.
As I've indicated, Essa has indicated that that is the support that they have. Okay. Again, I want to reiterate, whether he was reflecting
it's what
the
he told
truth
you
or not, I'm not sure.
No. That's fine.
But I think, Advocate Kavash, I think for the first time you also see the mention of Asia in the discussion, okay?
Yes,
And it's important because it leads up to what then happened.
yes. And the rest of that, the next sentence in 52, if you could go through that as well, because it's important when we look at the history of what happened.
So then, it also, as the meeting ends, Chair, Tony Gupta informs me that Essa will be their representative in this initiative that they want to launch.
The one involving Asia.
No, that they want to do business with Denel.
Doing
going
business
forward,
with
not only
Denel.
locally, but outside,
Yeah.
whatever else. Okay.
Okay.
Just to clarify, so in 52, you also say that they also wanted to know what potential local business opportunities
Yes,
there were in Denel.
but there was no specifics attached to that.
And it wasn't a lengthy discussion, it was
It wasn't.
just
They didn't say this, and they want to get in. There was nothing of that.
It was in general.
It was general.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think what, Chair, if I may, what became clear is that there was an intention to do business.
Yes. They made that quite clear. Yeah. And what remained was what Denel's reaction would be to this approach.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
continue.
So, I mean, by then it became clear, as I've just indicated, Chair, that for the first time, Essa, in the presence of Gupta, articulated very clearly that they want to get involved in the defense industry and Denel in particular. Okay.
At that stage,
So,
I'm sorry, at that stage, was there any concern on your part as to whether, in wanting to do business with Denel, they intended going through processes that everybody has to go through and complying with all the laws and regulations and policies in seeking to do business with Denel? Was there any idea in your mind whether what they were talking about as something they wanted to do was going to lead to anything like that, or at that stage, not really?
Chair, I mean, and I've indicated that at that interaction, I said very clearly that if there's any business that has to be done with Denel, it must be done in the proper way, and there must be a value proposition attached to it, and it must go through proper process. And I had said that very clearly there.
I beg your pardon.
And And they seemed to accept that.
Yeah, they were-
On your
Chair,
reading.
Chair, there was no debate about.
Yes.
But we do not accept that
Yeah,
as
yeah.
a statement.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, there was no argument. You had made your position clear, and they didn't seem to challenge that.
Yes, Chair.
The meeting ended on that basis. Okay.
Let's then move on to paragraph 53 and the thoughts that were going through your mind at this point in time.
So, Chair, as I've indicated earlier, then it became clear to me that they wanted to enter the defense environment and that they had seen Tenel as one vehicle through which to enter that environment. Okay, so it became clear that the interactions that they were having with me was to not even explore, but to investigate what would be the possibilities of, and that they were intent on doing business with Tenel. It wasn't only the possibilities, but they were clear that they wanted to do business with Tenel.
Please put in context the last sentence of paragraph 53. Were they continuously trying to contact you after the meeting at which Duduzane was present? Or how is one to interpret that very last sentence? If you could just read it into the record and just explain what you mean by that.
Sorry, which?
Paragraph 53,
Yeah.
this was my constant refrain. So constant refrain meaning?
Meaning in going forward with them, Chair.
Ah.
This has always been what I've consistently said. Okay.
To say any business will have to be done properly and with due compliance with the laws.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But this is what you said to them as the relationship.
As time went on,
Yeah, I don't want to call it developed because it really didn't develop.
Yes.
But as time went on is a good enough phrase. Yes. In 54, I noticed you,
So-
yes,
Advocate
Give the
Kalas,
evidence.
I think, Chair, also we need to understand the context within which all of this was happening. Okay? I mean, I have just gone through a lengthy explanation of what I was occupied with at Tenel in terms of its turnaround strategy, in terms of the role that I needed to play at Tenel to make this organization a success. It's a huge thing. Okay? Whilst I'm occupied with a very critical responsibility of running a company like Tenel, I'm then faced with this kind of interaction. So ESSA then calls me a few times and I ignore his phone calls. And that went on for almost 3 months. I did not, and eventually after 3 months of persistence, I had indicated to him that I was just starting, I was preoccupied at Tenel, and because obviously wanting to know why was I not taking his calls. But by this time, I realized that, I'm pushing the limits of what the expectation was. So eventually, I was again asked to come to a meeting at Saxonwold.
During that 3-month period when you ignored Mr. Esser's calls or requests, are you in a position, I know it's many years after, are you in a position to give some indication of the regularity of those calls, or those requests, or the frequency? Like maybe I would get a request on average once a month, or on average once 2 weeks, or if possible, you might not.
It wasn't frequent, as in like every week or every.
Okay. So it was quite frequent.
It wasn't.
So
it wasn't.
it wasn't
frequent.
as frequent as like every week.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, but.
But I realized at some point
Yes.
something had to give here.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Did any other business person, I'm choosing my language carefully, make as many calls as Mr. Esser did?
Chair, in the years that I've been in the industry, it's not been unusual that people phone you consistently for a meeting, you know, and sometimes you don't want to take the call and you just leave it. I mean, it's not, or you, the request. So it's not completely out of the norm that, but obviously this was an indication that at some point something had to give.
Then
So
continue.
So eventually I go to this meeting, and now it's already the latter part of 2012. So it's almost a year of me being there, you know.
And this would now be at the third meeting.
This will be the third meeting.
Yes.
Okay. So when I get there, it was only Tony Gupta and Essa in the meeting,
The venue is the same.
the same venue. And when I got into the meeting, the atmosphere was quite tense, if I may say so. And this time, Tony Gupta takes the lead. Okay. And he says to me, "You are not cooperating. And this lack of your cooperation is a serious issue," he says to me. And that also indicates that he does not want to elevate this further. Okay.
Did he explain the elevation of the issue?
No, he did not. He just said, "But I do not want to elevate it further." I mean, I can speculate what that meant, but
Well, I don't know if you would call it speculating, but I want to know what your understanding was of what he meant when he said he did not want to elevate it further.
Chair, if I may, my reading of it was that he was going to, because of the fact that I was trying to not meet with Essa when he was calling or whatever else, that he was going to either go to my political principles or the top, as they had called it, or whatever, to complain about the fact that I was not cooperating with them.
Which top you understood to be
As I've indicated earlier.
the former
You
president.
know, when he says elevated, where
Yeah.
would he elevate it to?
Yes,
You know.
yes.
Yes,
And
Chair.
this is in circumstances where you have met the minister who was your political principal at that residence with them. And in the second meeting, the former president's son was also there. So this is now the third meeting, but the former president's son was not there at this third
No.
meeting.
This
Yeah.
was specifically, I mean, in fact, I've never met Duduzani since that initial meeting.
Yes,
I've never
okay.
interacted with him.
Okay.
So, I have to say, Chair, I mean, I'm not the kind of person who's easily intimidated as well.
Yes.
But I was listening to what they had to say based on the circumstances, the context within which all of these interactions took place. And again, I said, I have no problem with you if you want to do business with Tinel, but you must do it in the proper way, you know. And if you come with a proposal or proposition that can add value to Tinel, and there's a value proposition attached to it and whatever else, it's fine. I cannot stop anybody from doing it because of the publicity around you, because of whatever has taken place. If it's legitimate, there is no reason why you cannot do business with Tinel. And that's how I address this issue, okay?
Did they engage you at all on what you called a proper process must be followed? Did they try to understand what you meant by a proper process?
I mean, if they had not understood what I meant, Advocate Kabashi, by a proper process, then, I mean, it would leave a lot to be desired. I mean, these were supposed to be business people.
Yes, you see, but the difficulty, of course, is that when they summoned you to accommodate them, as I understand your evidence, more than anything else, you would go to their house. But again, that conduct might be misinterpreted, which is why when you speak of proper process, they might not. I'm curious whether they would then have understood what you meant by proper processes must be followed.
I don't think they wanted to take that discussion further. It's my own view, because it would have been a difficult discussion, I think.
Well, from what you said earlier on, when you said what the position is that you articulated as far as Daniel is concerned, or as far as you are concerned, at least for that meeting, it must have been quite clear that you were quite firm that if any business was to be done with Daniel, it would have to be done properly and lawfully.
Yes, Chair.
And there's no reason why they wouldn't have understood that you were firm about that. Or not really.
Chair,
The way you conveyed it when you gave evidence a few minutes ago, I got the impression that they would have seen that you were firm on the point, but I may have misinterpreted.
no, I was
Yeah.
very clear about this thing. And I've said it to them whenever I've interacted and they've requested to do Denel. I've been consistent with what I've been saying with them, very clearly. So, and I don't think, Chair, that they would have taken that discussion to another level, because then it would have been very clear.
Up to this point, they had not given you a written proposal on anything at all.
No, there was nothing of the sort. And that's why there was no, I mean, it was now towards the end of 2012 already, and nothing had happened. You know. I've been there almost a year. It's not,
They had not even bothered to make inquiries on paper, I mean formally, that's proper process, formally, as to what opportunities might be available at Denel. There'd be no formal, in the sense of, I'm trying to interpret the proper process that you encourage them to follow. But there's not a single piece of paper that they sent through to you where they made inquiries so that they could then come and meet with the relevant persons to follow through on those inquiries.
that's correct.
Nothing.
No.
All you had were these discussions with them at Saxonville,
Yeah.
essentially.
What was the difference between the second and third meeting
The second meeting
in
was...
terms of the content of the
I mean-
discussion?
Chair, as I've indicated, the second meeting was also to indicate the fact that there was still another level of political support that they had. Okay.
In terms of Mr. Tutuzane Zuma being there?
Presence there. And also to send me a message that they presumably had supported my appointment and that I should understand that.
Yes. No, that's fine. Let me ask you, or let me mention something, and maybe it's just mentioning. Your evidence is that at the third meeting, Mr. Tony Gupta led the discussion, as I understand, whereas in the second meeting it was Mr. Essa, if I recall correctly,
Yes.
who led the discussion. Now, you say that Mr. Tony Gupta said that you were not cooperating and that your lack of cooperation was a serious issue. And he said that he did not want to elevate it further. You may or may not be able to comment on this. That the idea that he did not want to elevate the matter further
Yes,
could
Chair.
be interpreted as some kind of subtle threat. Are you able to comment, or are you not able to comment?
Chair, if an individual makes a comment like that, there is only one interpretation. I mean, unless
Yeah, tell me.
it is obviously a threat to elevate it somewhere
Yes,
else.
yes. Well, I had evidence last year from Mr. Masego, Themba Masego, who was Director General of GCIS, who said that at a certain stage in his interaction with Mr. Ajay Gupta said something to the effect that he was not cooperating. And if I recall correctly, he said that he talked about sorting him out or some kind of threat. And I think that may have been around October. And Mr. Masego gave evidence that in about 3 months later or 4 months later, in January of the following year, he was moved from the position of Director General of GCIS. You may or may not have had that evidence being given, but there was that evidence, and it looks like you also got some kind of threat for not cooperating.
Well, Chair, if I may say, it's very clear. I mean, if you look at what you are relating to me with regard to Themba Maseko,
Yes.
I mean, it's clear that there's a similar threat to this thing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Mr.
So,
Kabash.
can I continue at
Please
this,
do.
Kabash? And I mean, there was never a point at which I said you are not allowed to do business with Denel. I have to put
Yes.
that on the record.
Yes.
It's not- so, you know, just like we do business with, if there's a legitimate, irrespective of whether there's the negative publicity, but if they come with something that is legitimate and credible, you cannot stop that process.
And you could not say that to anybody. You are not allowed to do business with Denel. All you could do is whether you will do business with Denel will depend on the legal processes and so on.
Absolutely.
I would
Chair.
imagine,
It's
yeah.
not a competitive practice to tell people that you can't do business with Denel.
Yeah,
As long as
yeah.
it's legitimate. But in this meeting, then it goes further, Chair, because the issue of India comes up, and Tony Gupta is raising, he says, I must also be aware of the fact that they are working extremely hard to lift Denel's blacklisting in India. Okay. So I'm thinking to myself, and that because they are very influential in that environment, they can go a long way towards getting this problem resolved. Okay. But at the same time, I'm also very conscious and aware of the fact that we've got our own legal processes and diplomatic processes, and we have gone a long way towards addressing this. And we were making steady progress with getting to a point of resolving this thing. So I said, yes, but I did not respond to it. It was almost like a tirade he was going on to say, but are you aware that this is what we are doing and that we can assist? So, but there was no way that I could even entertain a discussion like that because we had legal processes in place. You know, what influence and network he was talking about, I cannot comment on that. I mean, it's not. Then he goes on to another subject. So we leave now he's making me aware of these issues.
Before you move on to the other subject, what was your subjective view? Do you think that they played any part at all in resolving the difficulties South Africa had in India?
Chair, from my perspective, that solution was reached primarily through the intervention of our own judicial legal processes. I cannot countenance the fact that there was some influence that was put there because, I mean, Denel was involved in a legal process that was resolved legally.
And as far as you know, that they had not been asked by Denel to do anything about that. That was being handled through proper channels.
Absolutely.
Yes, continue.
Then he says that Denel was one of the few SOCs that had not been supporting the New Age newspaper.
That was not supporting the New Age
The New Age newspaper.
newspaper. Yeah.
With subscriptions and or advertising and whatever else. Because everybody else, whether it was SAPC, ESCOM, SAA, was doing this And my answer was a simple thing, is that when I got to Tenel, we're in a turnaround strategy. Our financial resources are constrained. It must be focused and geared towards the operations. We cannot spend money on things which don't add value to the business. And that I was very clear on. But I was also aware that the people from New Age, it's the CEO and the editor, I think, Nazim Hawa and Mohsin Williams, that they were engaging with the Tenel people as well to discuss about how we could support their newspaper with these subscriptions and advertisements. And
Had you received reports of these engagements?
Fikile Mhlonto was obviously the CFO. Because it's a financial issue, I delegated him to deal with the issue. But I also said to him very clearly and categorically that we cannot entertain such a thing. And I think he did engage with them and he conveyed to them the same message. So that was another issue. Chair, I also have to just say that in light of this whole issue of the New Age thing, in my capacity as GCEO, I have attended the New Age SABC breakfast meetings that were televised live on SABC and you. And that was because if the Minister of Public Enterprises was the keynote speaker, all the group CEOs that fell under that portfolio were obliged to attend as well. And it was in that capacity that I attended those breakfast meetings. So then he goes on about this issue of the...
Well, it might be the convenient time, Ms. Or is she about
Chairman,
to
the
finish?
next two paragraphs close off
Oh,
on this
okay.
aspect. If
Okay, let's do that.
you would indulge us, thank you.
So, and then the meeting ended. I mean, it wasn't, didn't take any further. So it was him saying to me that these were the issues that they were concerned with, and that was it. It wasn't...
Can you just deal with what's in paragraph 61? Because that
No,
then closes off on that meeting.
Thanks, I'm coming to that. Gosh. So when the meeting ends, I'm walking out of the house. Essa is in front of me. This chap, Tony Gupta, is walking next to me. And here he says to me, why don't I take money? So he says to me, because everybody takes money. And I looked at him very specifically in his eyes and I said to him, I do not take money. And I walked down the stairs and I left.
Were you shocked by this offer?
Yes and no, Chair. Yes, because it was so blatant. I mean, it wasn't... and no, because given now what's going, with all the stuff that has preceded this interaction, I don't know what message he was trying to send. But I was very clear.
Well, Mr. Saluji, can you really say you don't know
No,
what
I
he
know.
meant?
I mean, you could interpret it in different, but I mean, it was clear, and it was blatant.
And that's why you had an answer, because you understood exactly what he was talking about.
And it was blatant. It wasn't
Yes.
like he was couching it in any other way.
Yes.
So, and then he went back inside and Essa was walking with me. Do you want me to stop there?
I think we can
Okay.
comfortably stop at this point, Chairman, and resume with
Yeah.
62 when we come back after the
Yes.
lunch adjournment.
Okay, thank you. We'll take the lunch adjournment and resume at 2 o'clock. We adjourn.
Can imagine.
But I'm wearing the right things at least.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah. Ah.
And these all
Put
these
this one here
Okay.
and this one here. Inside.
Daniela.